Test. Committee will be in order. Staff will clear the aisles. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to one of the sessions that we love to entertain you with. We've got a busy day, so let's get right to it. Let me now recognize Chairman Frelinghuysen to present his bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to all those who are not with us today, our men and women in uniform who serve across the globe defending our freedom. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines provide the mantle of security that allows us to meet in settings like these every day, and they should never be far from our minds. They and their families deserve our heartfelt thanks for their personal sacrifice. I know you share those sentiments as well. I also want to thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy, for your support through the process and for the expedited subcommittee markup that allows us to be here of last week, that allows us to be here this morning. Special thanks to Pete Visklowski for his partnership in this effort. We've spent a lot of time together with military leaders, representatives of the intelligence community, our membership. I thank him for his assistance, his collaboration, and his friendship. I'd be remiss if I did not recognize two departing members of our subcommittee, Andrew Crenshaw and Steve Israel, and thank them for their significant contributions. Please do give them a round of applause. I'd also like to recognize, as other chairs have before me, the remarkable work of our personal staff, and most particularly our professional staff that is arrayed behind me. They look to national priorities, they look to member priorities. They've considered yours, they've worked hard, they've done all sorts of remarkable things to put this bill together. I'll recognize them individually when we get to the floor, but there too, their remarkable hard work on our behalf over the last couple of months putting this bill together deserves special recognition. I know you share the pride I have in the work that they do. Mr. Chairman, I rise to present the Defense Subcommittee's recommendation for fiscal year 2017's Department of Defense Appropriations bill. I also want to thank each member of the subcommittee for their loyal attendance at our many hearings and briefings that have helped shape this legislation. These meetings have allowed us to look in great detail into our national defense posture and the capabilities of our adversaries and our partners. We are concerned by what we see. Over the past several years, we've largely focused on the dangers posed by Islamic terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, barbaric ISIS, al-Nusra, and others in the Middle East and Africa. But in recent years, new threats have emerged. A more aggressive and capable Russia, an expansionist China, emboldened states like Iran, rogue nations like North Korea. At the same time, we're dealing with fiscal constraints imposed by sequestration and budget caps. Looking today at our Department of Defense and Intelligence community, we note our readiness levels are alarmingly low for our soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen. Our decisive technological edge over our adversaries is eroding. Our adversaries' resolve and their capability are only growing. The bill before you begins to reverse these trends by providing more money for national security. Our recommendation mirrors the funding structure that the House Armed Services Committee introduced a few weeks ago. It shifts $16 billion from the President's overseas contingency request into the base bill, while providing a bridge fund for our overseas operations through the end of April of next year. At that time, the new Commander-in-Chief will be able to assess our defense posture, reevaluate readiness levels and recapitalization efforts, and request a targeted supplemental to support our troops. I'm confident that members of this committee will work in a bipartisan way to ensure that this essential supplemental appropriations legislation is passed when the time comes. Rest assured, we will never let our troops down. By providing a bridge fund to next April, rather than an entire year of funding, this bill is able to make targeted investments in additional manning for the Army, Marines, and Air Force, more training, as well as equipment they rely on, all designed to repair the worrisome readiness gaps we see across our armed services. Funding for base requirement totals $532.8 billion, $15.1 billion above the President's request. In order to make every dollar count, we've exercised oversight responsibilities vigorously and have reduced funding for programs that have seen unjustified cost increases, been subject to contract or schedule delays, been restructured or terminated, including funding requested addressing funding and requested ahead of need, and addressing the whole issue of historical under-execution. As a result of this work, and may I again commend the staff and the members, we're able to increase funding for the number of troops, adding 52,000, 27 for the active military and 25,000 for the Guard and Reserves, and their training by $9.4 billion over the President's request. And for equipment, the service chiefs have requested in their unmet needs list to approximately $9.6 billion. These investments will allow our military services to fully meet critical training requirements such as training, flying hours, and ground training, improve our facilities, and increase the number of troops to reverse years of reductions. The recommendation ensures that our military and intelligence community are able to rebuild their advantages over our near-peer adversaries. We currently have the lowest manning level in the Army since before World War II. And this legislation boosts Army and Marine Corps end strength. Our Navy fleet is now smaller than at any time before World War I. And this bill funds a significant increase in shipbuilding. Our Air Force is flying the oldest fleet in its entire history. And this measure boosts modernization of our fighters, bombers, tankers, and other aircraft. I also want to note that our legislation again includes $500 million to continue our investment in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what we call ISR, for our combatant commanders. We've heard from them. I think all of us are pleased by the aggressiveness with which the Department of Defense has used these additional resources that we've provided, and we look forward to working with them in fiscal year 2017. Mr. Chairman, as I close, I want to make an observation about this year's debate. The President's spokesman and Secretary of Defense were quick to criticize the funding structure of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Bill, and indeed this morning's proposal. The White House and Secretary Carter have suggested we are gambling with the troops' mission in the Middle East. What was really gambling was the administration's decision to pull our troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan against the advice of our military leadership and not anticipate the resulting vacuum would be filled by ISIS, the Taliban, and other terrorist groups. What was gambling was ousting Gaddafi in Libya without a plan for the aftermath. It is gambling to believe that Iran will not violate many aspects of the Geneva Agreement. It is gambling to believe that the American people would not pay close attention to increased U.S. military operations in Syria and Iraq if the President simply refused to call them combat operations. It was gambling to establish a poorly thought out and poorly executed train and equip scheme in Syria, an expensive gamble. It was gambling that China and Russia would cease their aggressive challenges to American superiority in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic if only we backed away. My friends, one thing that we can all agree on is that the last few years of budget cuts and constant deployments have only eroded our readiness and capabilities. The bill before you does not gamble. Rather, this proposal wisely invests more money for our troops, more money for training, badly needed, modern equipment, expanded cybersecurity, more intelligence gathering capability, and yes, better health care outcomes for our troops and their families. The Constitution is quite clear. It says the primary job of Congress is to provide for the common defense. The bill before you allows us to fill that important responsibility in an increasingly dangerous world. I thank you for your close attention, and I urge adoption of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Visklosky, for any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin, first of all, by thanking you and Ms. Lowy as chair and ranking of the full committee for providing an atmosphere to allow us on the subcommittee to do our work. I also do want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Chairman Frelinghuysen. He is our chair and leader on the committee. As he noted, it is a wonderful partnership with all of the members. And I, too, am privileged to consider him a friend. I also do want to recognize that the chair and the staff, and again, the members of the subcommittee, have gone to extraordinary lengths to be as inclusive in this process as possible, to be as transparent as possible in this process, and also to go to extraordinary lengths, again, to address members' concerns. I do want to thank each member of the subcommittee for their very good work. I, too, would want to very much thank our two departing members. I'm from the north and I'm Slovak, but I have a special kinship with Mr. Crenshaw. I had the good sense to marry a woman from Jacksonville, Florida. And Mr. Israel, we will miss your politic understanding of the legislative process, and I truly mean that. And the staff, both committee as well as associate, in this particular bill, in this particular year, have acted with wisdom and elegance. The chairman has well and clearly articulated the major elements of the bill. Primarily, my remarks will pertain to about 27% of the OCO account, and overall, about 3% of the underlying bill. Even under less than ideal circumstances and unsettled conditions, Chairman Frelinghuysen and the subcommittee have again demonstrated their talent and acumen in putting together the legislation. My written remarks, which are before you, provide more details on what I see are the highlights of the bill. However, I would like to use the balance of my time to discuss circumstances and conditions that did lead to the proposal to use nearly 27% of the overseas contingency operation accounts to fund base Department of Defense programs, which gives me pause as an appropriator. It was as an appropriator that I opposed the Budget Control Act of 2011 and its arbitrary spending caps that only address 1/6 of the federal budget equation. In each session of the Congress, we should be making discrete decisions on how we annually invest our discretionary dollars. Setting inflexible spending targets for 10 years is nonsensical. I believe we need to invest more in our roads, in our ports, water pipes, universities, and I do believe we need to invest more in our defense. We might disagree on the ways to generate more resources, and we do need to have a more fulsome discussion of our entitlement programs. But my assumption is that there are very few people in this room who believe that the federal government is currently making enough of a long-term investment in our nation and its interests and its defense. It is and was as an appropriator that I voted for the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, which mitigated the caps on discretionary funding and capped OCO spending for fiscal years 16 and 17. I supported the BBA because it provided some clarity to the appropriations process for the balance guardedly optimistic that to base strategy conceived to placate some on other committees, was settled upon as a strategy for the House majority. While this bill does not technically violate the caps established by the BBA for base defense programs and OCO, it is hard to argue that this bill will be assembled under what passes for normalcy in the Congress of the United States. There is no doubt that the chairman and subcommittee staff made smart investment decisions in executing the $15.7 billion in OCO to base funding strategy. However, I am deeply troubled with the circumstances that compelled the subcommittee's action. First and foremost, my fiscal year starts October 1st, 2016, not May 2017. And it is the responsibility of those holding public office in the second session of the 114th Congress to execute the fiscal year 2017 appropriations process in its entirety. In order to make OCO funding available for base programs, our bill only provides enough funding to fully support the warfighter until the end of April 2017, which is 5 months short of the end of the fiscal year. This is intended to force the next administration, the next Congress, to pass a supplemental in calendar year 2017 to support ongoing combat operations. It is not, from my perspective, the responsibility of the 115th Congress to finish a predetermined fraction of our work, and we should not be dismissive of the difficulties we and they would face. To assume that there will be smooth sailing for a supplemental bill in the spring of next year is problematic. We do not know who will be in the White House, who will be the civilian leadership of the DOD, who will compose the next Congress of the United States. As we can clearly see from the Zika virus debate, and before that, the debate on Hurricane Sandy supplemental appropriation bills are not without controversy. Additionally, in making the $15.7 billion in cuts to OCO budget requests, the committee had to make some assumptions on the pace of combat operations. The chairman again exercised care and caution, but there is not much wiggle room in the interim. If the OCO spend rate were to increase for any reason, Congress and the new administration would have to act very quickly to pass a supplemental bill in early 2017. If that supplemental were not timely, the department would likely be forced to reprogram or transfer base dollars, which shortchanges other priorities, negates the committee's funding levels and priorities, and still requires a supplemental to backfill both base and OCO while not violating the Budget Control Act. Conference process. Putting concerns of uncertainty aside, I further believe that the OCO to base strategy abdicates our discretion to the Department of Defense in executing the remaining OCO funding, and again, I make the observation as an appropriator. In order to free up $15.7 billion, certain appropriations in OCO were subject to reductions. These reductions were done at the account level, not the program level. For example, Navy O&M in the OCO title was reduced by $2.9 billion. The department has discretion on how to apply that $2.9 billion reduction across the tens of programs under that account. A final concern I have, and one I have expressed in previous years' markups, is that we should eliminate reliance on OCO funding in the first instance, and obviously that primary responsibility lies with the administration, and shift activities to the base budget. It is increasingly difficult, after 15 years of war, to argue that this operational tempo for our military is a contingency and not the new normal in defending our nation and our interests. This subcommittee has begun to limit what is eligible as an expense in OCO, and I absolutely agree with that approach. But under the BBA and this latest proposal, we would, I believe, take a step back. For example, the bill proposes an increase in strength by 52,000 above planned reductions for the Army, Marine Corps, and Air Force. I agree that we need more military personnel. But this additional force structure costs $3 billion in fiscal year 17. We cannot keep deferring tough decisions. This is particularly true when recognizing the fact that the budget caps are scheduled to lower defense spending in fiscal year 2018 by $2 billion. An increase in end strength creates a tail of spending in future years. The Department of Defense estimates that the troop levels funded in the bill would increase spending by $30 billion over 5 years. But that $30 billion is not budgeted, and it would fall upon the subcommittee to find the money. Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for going on for some time about my concerns, but I feel very strongly about them. But these circumstances, uncertainties they introduced are an unnecessary complication that the full committee and subcommittee should not have faced, and they do increase the burden to the chair and the committee. It is a mark of Chairman Frelinghuysen's talent and the staff's talent, their commitment to our troops and our nation's defense, and their seriousness of purpose, that they have done so much good to ameliorate the problems caused by this approach. I do look forward to working with the chair and the members of the subcommittee and the full committee to advance the process and to complete the task before us. With that, Chairman, I appreciate the time you have allotted me.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank both of you for your hard work on this bill. You both have important jobs leading this subcommittee, and I'm glad to have both of you at the helm. And also to thank the rest of the subcommittee and staff for their work in bringing this bill before us today. This is a hard-working subcommittee with enormous jurisdiction and with over half of the federal budget, federal spending to deal with. The world we live in is changing so quickly. We face ongoing attacks and threats from terrorist organizations and enemies spanning the globe. Our troops must be fully prepared to fight at all times, to maintain readiness and to ensure our military success. The bill provides $575.8 billion in discretionary funding for the national security of this country. To sustain our military superiority, the bill contains $70.8 billion for the research and development that keeps our armed forces on the cutting edge of defense technology, and provides $120.8 billion for the equipment and upgrades that our military relies on. The legislation includes funding above the request for military personnel and pay, avoiding troop reductions proposed by the White House. The bill also fully funds the authorized 2.1% pay raise instead of the 1.6% request by the White House. The bill provides $34 billion for defense health programs, $1.7 billion above last year, to care for our troops, the families, and retirees. The bill increases funding above the President's request for key research into traumatic brain injury and psychological health, as well as for sexual assault prevention and response. The bill also provides authority to use funding to address the risk that the growing Zika epidemic poses to our service members and their families. The use of OCO funding in this bill adheres to the National Defense Authorization Act the House is considering beginning today. Overall, this bill makes responsible steps to avoid any readiness shortfalls and to bolster troop end strength while supporting our partners in the fight against ISIS and making critical investments in our efforts to stop violent extremism. I'm proud to support this bill, Mr. Chairman, and I ask for the committee's endorsement of it as well today. Now let me recognize Ms. Loy for any comments she would like to open up with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I would like to also recognize two friends, two outstanding committee members, Steve Israel and Andrew Cranshaw, before their last defense markup. I wish you well. We'll miss you. It's been an honor to serve you, and I hope you will continue to give us your invaluable advice and opinions, or maybe you will not. Thank you so very much. First of all, I'd like to thank my friend Chairman Frelinghuysen, Ranking Member Visklosky, and Chairman Rogers for holding this markup. This has always been one of the most bipartisan subcommittees, and I hope we will enact a final bill that upholds that tradition. Although the road to regular order was paved by last year's bipartisan Budget Act, we still do not have a full slate of allocations for all subcommittees. How can we evaluate whether allocations for bills early in the process are fair, or whether they are receiving more or less than their share when allocations trickle out one at a time? The fact is, we cannot. Today, we consider a defense bill that blows up last year's budget agreement through a gimmick that needlessly creates a funding cliff next spring. It forces the new president's first actions in office to request emergency supplemental funding. The difference here is about more than bookkeeping. Sending our military men and women into some of the most dangerous places on earth, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, without ensuring in this bill that we provide mission support or pay their salary for a full year, is the height of irresponsibility. Here are some of the things that Secretary Carter has said about the Republican OCO budget gimmick. Deeply troubling, flawed, gambling with war-fighting money, creating a hollow force structure, working against our efforts to restore readiness, a road to nowhere, a high probability of leading to more gridlock, undercut stable planning, and efficient use of taxpayer dollars, dispirits troops and their families, baffles friends, and emboldens foes. This is Secretary Ash Carter. Notice that I said Republican strategy, not the chairman's strategy. I don't think anyone in this room believes this is the best approach, but I do believe that it is dictated from above. There's a great deal of good elsewhere in the bill, and I do want to thank the chairman for his work to provide a pay raise for the troops, increase cybersecurity operations by nearly $1 billion, invest in the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance resources combatant commanders clamor for, provide strong bipartisan support for allies in the Middle East, and finance important health initiatives that help warfighters and their families. But all that could have been done while providing certainty for troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. In conclusion, I want to say I look forward to working with my colleagues to improve the bill before it is enacted.
Thank the gentlelady. Is there further general discussion? If not, are there amendments? Excuse me. Who seeks recognition? Ms. Capter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just have a brief general statement, and I want to thank Chairman Frelinghuysen and Ranking Member Visklosky and our very able staff for their work on this important bill. Also, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Lowy, thank you for your leadership during these really challenging times on this very, very significant bill. While this bill provides a great many necessary programs, such as increased troop levels, focus on our neglected defense infrastructure, and assurance of our commitment to our European allies, it does so at the expense of what our service chiefs and secretaries have requested of us from day one, and that is stability and predictability. On these priorities, this bill fails because the Budget Committee has really not done its job for the country. Instead, it places our national defense in a position of uncertainty and that proclaims neither strength nor vision and shortchanges those who need this bill the most, and that is our troops, those engaged on the battlefield. While there's no easy answer to the inadequacies that confront us this morning, I hope we can come together to find a solution that funds our troops in harm's way, not just for 7 months, but for the entire year, and gives military leaders the certainty they need to plan successfully. Our committee has a long and strong history of coming together to work above political frays and to ensure that funding is advanced, such as the State Partnership Program, which utilizes the unique capabilities and skills of our National Guard to build long-lasting bonds with our allies across the world, and also for cyber operations, which undoubtedly are becoming one of the most important battlefields. I'm also happy to see increased funding for Defense Production Act activities, which support initiatives like strategic metals, such as beryllium and reconstitution of space propulsion test facilities, all of which are very vital to our defense capabilities. I appreciate the chairman and the committee staff for diligently working to incorporate many of these priorities, but wanted to express my sincere disappointment that we run up against the ledge of next April 30th, and then there are no more funds. This simply is not the way to govern, and I wanted to place it on the record this morning, and I thank you very much for yielding me the time.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a word of thanks to you and the chairman, ranking members for including my and Mr. Palazzo's advanced orthopedic surgical training language into the manager's amendment. I also want to thank you all for including the report language that requires the Defense Department to issue a detailed estimate of the life cycle costs for replacing and sustaining all legs of the nuclear triad, because over the next decade, the U.S. is going to be spending about $350 billion operating and upgrading our nuclear arsenal, and over the next 3 decades, the U.S. is expected to spend as much as $1 trillion on our arsenal. But in this budget environment, every dollar we spend to keep our outdated and oversized arsenal functioning is a dollar we aren't spending on other priorities. These include critical spending on Homeland Security grants, intelligence gathering, and cybersecurity. The more we can highlight unsustainable cost of our entire triad and the immense pressure it places on our defense budget, the sooner we can start building a common-sense plan to reduce our arsenal and reshape our strategy. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar?
Yes, sir. Just briefly, Chairman. I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for working in a very, very bipartisan approach, and also you, Mr. Chairman, and ranking woman Alita Notary. I just want to bring a couple of things that I want to thank the chairman for including. First of all, the National Guard County Drug Program, which the administration oversees out. We put back $159 million. I thank you for doing that. The other thing is the National Guard State Partnership Program. As you know, Mr. Chairman, we've seen that in Chile. We've seen that in other countries where National Guards, I know the state of Texas works with Chile and Czech and other National Guards do that. I know that was plussed up. So I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for plussing that up. I know that Operation Felix also is one that the Homeland Security got a certain amount of monies. They cut it back because of the flight hours. Now that they're seeing the numbers going back, they're going to ask that. So I'm going to ask that Chairman Carter, which we've been talking, that hopefully once they put those numbers, we'll put it back again. The other thing is there was a plus up in the historically black and Hispanic institutions. I also want to thank, that was plussed up generously, and I want to say thank you. But I also want to say in the past it only included historically black universities, and I want to thank you because in 2 different areas, the National Security Education Program and the STEM, we added Hispanic serving institutions. So again, that's vital for having a diverse education, and I want to thank the chairman, both chairmen and both ranking members for adding that. Thank you.
Is there further general discussion? If not, are there amendments, Mr.
Chairman, I have a manager's amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Mr. Frelinghuysen.
I ask that it be considered to be read.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I know for some of you the manager's amendment is warm to the touch. Let me say it's been a work in progress, but testimony just a few minutes ago shows that we try to accommodate all of our members and their keen interest in the purposes of our bill. This manager's amendment incorporates various non-controversial items in the bill and report. Specifically, amendment increases funding for combat telemedicine by $7.5 million and includes bill language addressing per diem issues at the Department of Defense. The amendment also adds non-controversial report language agreed to by the majority and the minority, and I move the amendment be adopted.
Mr. Visklowski?
I appreciate that the chair did not look to his right when he talked about the warmth of the document before you. I feel his warmth, and I warmly support the manager's amendment.
Ooh.
This is getting a little bit deep here. Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to add to the era of good feelings, I'd like to thank the chairman and the ranking member for including a provision in the chairman's mark that prohibits the use of funds to further implement the DoD's long-term TDY policy. I represent tens of thousands of military, active duty military and federal employees. And I've heard about how detrimental this policy has been, not just in terms of their ability to keep us safe, but the readiness of our nation as well. The DoD's policy has resulted in reduced morale for service members and for federal employees. It's meant hardship for our local businesses. It's added cost to departmental operations, and it's reduced our readiness. And so this policy needs to be repealed, and I want to thank the ranking member and the chair for supporting me in this effort to do that, and I yield back. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on the manager's amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments? Ms. Lee?
I have an amendment at the desk, lead number 1.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Ms. Lee at the end of the bill before this.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I intend to offer this amendment, and then I intend to withdraw it. It actually, lead number 1 would repeal the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, which really has become a blank check for endless war. This amendment would repeal it 180 days after enactment of this act. As our brave servicemen and women continue to be deployed around the world in what certainly are combat zones, whether they're combat troops or not, these are combat zones they're in, Congress, once again, is missing in action when it comes to our constitutional duty. On September 14th, of course, that was when this body, Democrats and Republicans, voted for this authorization. I could not vote for it because I knew then that it would authorize any president at any time to wage endless war without a congressional debate or vote. And I want to draw your attention to a copy of the new report from the Congressional Research Service, which I encourage all of my colleagues to read. It shows that this authorization has in fact become a blank check. In the 14 years since it was enacted, the 2001 AUMF has been used 37 times, mind you, in 14 countries to wage war with little or no congressional oversight. It's been used 18 times by the Bush administration and 19 times by the Obama administration. And this report only looks at unclassified incidents. How many other times has it been used without the knowledge of Congress or the American people? Not only has this authorization been used to justify military action thousands of miles away, it's also been used much closer to home to allow, and this Congressional Research Service lays it out, warrantless surveillance and wiretaps, indefinite detentions at Gitmo, and targeted killings by drones, including some American citizens. It's also been cited as the authority for the nearly 2-year-long war against ISIL, a war that Congress has yet to debate and vote on or authorize. And we all agree that ISIL must be degraded and dismantled, and that's why Congress, once again, is missing in action and has not done its job. Every day, more bombs fall. We've lost 3 brave servicemen recently. We've already poured in more than $9.6 billion, and we spend an additional $615,000 per hour. So it's past time that Congress live up to its constitutional responsibility and debate this war and all these other wars that we're engaged in. So we need to first repeal the 2001 AUMF. I recognize that very few colleagues here would probably support this. That's why I'm not going to call for a vote, and I'm going to withdraw consideration of the amendment.
Is the gentlelady withdrawing the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Without objection, amendment is withdrawn. Are there other amendments? Ms. Lee.
I have a Lee amendment number 2.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Ms. Lee. At the end of the bill, before the spending reduction account, insert the following, Sec A. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to
Ask for the
deploy.
reading to be
Without
dispensed.
objection, the reading is dispensed with. Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, this amendment prevents another U.S. service member from being deployed for yet another Middle East war until Congress musters the courage to debate this war. Once again, how can we ask our brave servicemen and women to face snipers and mortar rounds while those of us in this building really lack the spine or backbone to even debate the war that we're asking them to fight? I'm the daughter of a veteran, which I mentioned before in this committee, mentioned it several times. And I believe that our troops deserve their congressional representatives to really stand up for them. We have to do our job in order for them to do their job. And so it's time we lived up to our constitutional duty to debate this war, its costs and its consequences, and a real strategy to end ISIS's reign of terror. There's a growing chorus, mind you, a bipartisan chorus in Congress for this action, given its inaction. Since 2014, more and more members have been demanding a debate. Newspapers, including the New York Times, just last week have called on Congress to act. A recent CNN international poll found that 73% of Americans believe that ISIL is a serious threat to our nation, and we know that. Just 2 weeks ago, an active duty serviceman filed a lawsuit highlighting the lack of a congressional debate and authorization. Despite all of this, Congress again remains missing in action. Our troops and the American people deserve better. We're lacking, really, I have to say, in the courage to really, truly address this and to join the fight against ISIL. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and force the debate and vote, which actually our Constitution mandates and demands.
Chairman Freeland.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment. As with other amendments offered by the gentlelady on this and other occasions, U.S. military forces are currently conducting multiple airstrikes against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, and they would stop immediately if this were to be adopted. Should the current authorizations of the use of military force be replaced? Perhaps they should, but is now the time while our troops are engaged in the fight? I think not. They need to be shown our full support. 1 year ago, then Speaker Boehner urged President Obama to start from scratch on a measure to legally authorize the Islamic State conflict, declaring, in his own words, "We don't have a strategy," within quotations. I agree with Speaker Boehner back then, as I do now. We don't have a strategy against ISIL. That lack of strategy has allowed ISIL to continue their cowardly destruction and slaughtering across the Middle East and Northern Africa. In a December letter to the Secretary of Defense, I asked that he provide the committee, our committee, a complete implementation plan for the support of the Syrian Arab coalition. Over 4 months later, just last week or two ago, on April 27th, the Secretary finally responded in classified form with a weak plan, full of rhetoric, that appears to be in a continuation of the administration's lack of strategy, which for nearly 2 years has resulted, quite honestly, in a stronger Islamic State. At a time when sectarian tensions are at their highest level since the end of Operation Iraqi Freedom in September of 2010, and terrorists continue to kill innocent civilians, causing thousands to flee, creating the greatest refugee crisis since World War II. What kind of message would this amendment send to both the Iraqi and Syrian people, to our soldiers and Marines who have so valiantly served and sacrificed? I understand the symbolism of this amendment, but there are consequences if it were adopted, and I strongly and emphatically urge its rejection. Thank you for the time.
Mr. Visklosky.
Appreciate the recognition. I rise in support of the gentlewoman's amendment. She withdrew her last amendment relative to the use of military force. Would point out that a portion of that authorization that was enacted on September 18th, 2001, authorized all necessary and appropriate force against any person or entity associated with the September 11th attacks in order to prevent any further acts of international terrorism. The debate is obviously today not only on Al-Qaeda, that has changed, as well as has this body, but on ISIL. And the woman's deadline is April 30th of next year, which I do believe gives this Congress almost a year to have a fulsome debate about what we should do relative to the use of military force. I think that's exactly what our responsibility is, and do support her efforts. I yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Reggio.
I hold the chairman in high regard, but the seriousness of this issue is something that compels me to speak on it. I have a military-intensive district. I know many of us do. That doesn't give me any more claim to wisdom in this matter. But I do know this, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, has made it very clear that the passage of an AUMF, in his own words, I absolutely believe that a clear and unequivocal statement of support for the men and women that are prosecuting the campaign and our allies from their elected officials would be absolutely helpful. I wouldn't have risen and spoken on this a year ago, but my own conference that I'm so often proud of, I'm not proud of our conference in this respect. We, in this institution generally, we owe our men and women in uniform, I think, all the support we can give them, and that means passage of an AUMF or debating it. We won't bring it to the floor. We all kind of say we support it, but it never gets to the floor. I'm not sure why. I'm not going to get into the motives of that. But I know the men and women who are fighting right now, we owe them everything we can give them. And I appreciate the gentlelady's amendment. And again, a year ago, I wouldn't have voted for this, but I am today because it's very clear we're not moving. And I think we can do better than this. I'm among those who hold the view that to rely upon that existing AUMF, legally there's no basis for it. I can't see the construct of getting to where we're lawfully abiding on this. And I'll close with this, that the reasons that the chairman gave to oppose the bill, I believe I see them differently. What I mean by that is our failure to have a strategy. That's why we need to debate this on the floor of the House and pass it and do our part. It's been over 450 days since the President sent an AUMF over. I'm going to support this bill, and I encourage my colleagues to as well, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this matter. I yield back.
Is there further discussion? If not, Ms. Lee's recognized to close.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of my colleagues for their support, and just close by saying I do believe that the chairman's arguments really speak to why we do need to pass this new authorization. Our troops deserve it. They need to know the costs and consequences of what they are doing, and that we support their efforts, or we believe that there should be a different strategy. But minimally, we should have a debate and an understanding of what the costs, as I said, and consequences are of their new involvement in this war. So I ask for an aye vote.
Question is on the Lee amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
No seems to have it. The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Ms. Lowy.
I have one.
Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more that I will hopefully get support for from both sides. It's once again a very
Clerk
simple
will
amendment.
read the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Lee. At the end of the bill, before the spending reduction account, insert the
Without
following.
objection, reading is
Thank you,
dispensed
Mr.
with.
Chairman. What this amendment does, it recognizes that Congress has a vital and necessary role to play in our efforts to degrade and to dismantle ISIL. To date, ISIL, Congress missing in action. We've ignored our constitutionally mandated role in war making. This sense of Congress amendment recognizes the United States has been at war against ISIL for nearly 2 years, that's 20 months, and that it has been 15 months since President Obama sent to Congress a proposed authorization for the use of military force. This amendment, similar to the one adopted by this committee last year, reaffirms that Congress has a constitutional duty to debate and determine whether or not to authorize the use of military force against ISIL. Let me quote, Congress finds that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has the authority to declare war. Therefore, Congress has a constitutional duty to debate and determine whether or not to authorize the use of military force against ISIL. I know that we all agree that ISIL must be stopped. The acts that they've carried out against the region are truly horrific, and more than 70% of Americans believe that ISIL poses a serious threat. In the face of ISIL's horrors, how can this Congress continue to be missing in action? Mr. Chairman, I ask for an aye vote.
Chairman Frelinghuysen.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to accept the gentlewoman's amendment. And may I say that I think what the President sent to me in response to our committee in terms of our serious strategy was everything that I said it was, totally inadequate. So I understand the issue of authorization that has been expressed by Mr. Regal and your good self, but in reality, if authorization is based on what he said is our inherent strategy, we are off to a very poor start, and I think that's been reflective in what's been happening in the Middle East. We're pleased to accept her amendment.
Is there
Thank you.
further discussion? Ms. Wiskowski, you support? Question is on the Lee amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Ayes have it. The amendment's agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I'll wait to be called.
Ms. Loy?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to offer an amendment with my colleagues, Mr. Lauro and Ms. Wasserman Schultz, to provide the $1.9 billion in emergency supplemental funding.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Lowy.
I waive the reading.
Without objection, reading is dispensed with.
President Obama requested this amount to mount a full and complete defense against the Zika virus. As summer approaches, the CDC's most recent statistics show more than 1,200 cases of Zika among Americans, including more than 100 pregnant women. So far, all of the continental U.S. cases are associated with travel, but we expect the first locally transmitted cases in a matter of weeks. Just last week, the first Zika-related microcephaly case on U.S. soil was reported in Puerto Rico, showing severe microcephaly in a fetus. We know it will only get worse. In Brazil, the World Health Organization expects at least 2,500 cases of babies with brain damage and clinical signs of microcephaly. That's just one nation, and that's just the start. Robust resources are urgently needed to deploy medical countermeasures, care for affected mothers and children, and support multilateral efforts to stem the spread of Zika. We need to act now to improve surveillance globally and increase availability of diagnostic tools to identify additional outbreaks. House Republican leadership dithered and delayed, so the administration was forced to redirect $589 million, mostly from emergency Ebola balances, to fund mosquito control, vaccine development, and other immediate efforts to respond to Zika. According to Dr. Fauci at the National Institutes of Health, the redirected funds allowed the U.S. to start work, but we can't finish what we need to do. The Republican bill that will be considered this week does not allow us to finish the job either. It would provide only $622 million, less than a third of what is needed. In just one of the many ways the House Republican Zika bill shortchanges the Zika response, it provides only $120 million plus an additional $50 million for block grants for state and local efforts to reduce mosquito populations and conduct public health studies of Zika. The administration needs $743 million to get the job done. This effort would drastically underfund public health departments, hamper efforts to expand mosquito control and mitigation, and unnecessarily place millions of pregnant women at risk. It would weaken our efforts to eradicate Ebola once and for all and leave us vulnerable at a time when we're yet to complete commitments to fortify international public health systems or respond to outbreaks of either Ebola or Zika. If we don't meet the demands of Zika directly, my friends, we will face its costs for years to come. Let's work together to address the seriousness of this threat with the response that it needs, the full $1.9 billion emergency request, and I urge support for my amendment.
I rise in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment. We're as concerned as anyone else about this disease, especially since it affects some of our most precious and vulnerable populations. In fact, in April, this committee's efforts forced the administration to redirect $589 million from existing unobligated leftover funds for the Zika response. And that's why yesterday I introduced legislation to provide $622.1 million to be available immediately for the rest of the fiscal year to fight this disease. And this money, I would remind you, combined with the earlier $589 million, totals $1.2 billion that's available just for the next 5 months. The administration's request of $1.9 billion was for several years. We're proposing here, and I think enacting, $1.2 billion for just the next 5 months, the end of this fiscal year. And then Chairman Cole and Chairman Granger and their subcommittees will consider where we go for fiscal 17. This problem is evolving. No one really knows for sure where it's headed. And so we need to remain agile and lithe so that we can respond as needs be at the time. And so funding this money for the balance of this fiscal year gets us on top of the problem, I think, adequately. We've analyzed it very carefully. And this will get us, I think, safely through the end of the fiscal year. And then the regular subcommittee, regular order will take over for fiscal 17 and beyond. We expect this bill to be considered by the House tomorrow. We want to provide the resources needed to protect our people and stop the spread of this terrible disease around the globe. The gentlelady's amendment, which is essentially the administration's request, has some glaring flaws. Her amendment provides $1.9 billion without proper justification, without targeting, without oversight over the spending of these monies. It essentially lets the administration spend these funds as it wishes across the government to agencies that have nothing to do with this disease and across multiple years without a guarantee that they will actually be used effectively to fight Zika. Conversely, our bill specifically targets funding to activities that are needed now in this fiscal year. This includes mosquito vector control at home and at the source, as well as vaccine development, and it is fully offset. Combined with the $600 million we urged the administration to redirect previously, this bill, as I said, will bring the total to $1.2 billion, which will address all Zika-related needs over the next several months. Any additional funding that's necessary to fight the outbreak in the next fiscal year can and will be considered as part of the normal appropriations process. In fact, we've already included Zika language in 2 of our 2017 committee bills. That's what regular order is. Our bill also includes strong oversight measures to ensure these funds are used to effectively fight the Zika virus and not for other purposes. For example, the bill provides funding for the GAO and to each agency's inspector general to maintain strict oversight and to report on the use of the funding. It requires that agencies submit spending plans and congressional notification before funds are obligated. It puts an expiration date on the funding, and it targets the funds and does not allow them to be transferred to other activities. In all, our legislation is responsible, it's effective, and it will provide the necessary response to fight the spread of Zika immediately. It could be approved by the House as early as tomorrow, bringing us one step closer to getting the funds online as soon as possible. The gentlelady's amendment falls short on all these accounts, while costing the taxpayers nearly $2 billion. Even if it were attached to this bill, it wouldn't become law for months, causing even further delays in the fight against Zika. So I urge you to vote no on the Lowy amendment. Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I again join my colleagues in urging this committee to take meaningful action to address the public health crisis that the Centers for Disease Control recently called, quote, scarier than we originally thought, and support the President's request for supplemental funding for the Zika virus. With all due respect, the proposed legislation that we will hear this week, offered by the House majority, is the furthest thing from responsible. Robbing Peter to pay Paul, inadequately funding a crisis that is unfolding as we speak, taking money from Ebola to provide funds to combat a crisis that we are in the midst of, while ignoring the fact, as the Centers for Disease Control told us last week, that Ebola is still a potential crisis that we need to leave the funding in place to address, is wildly irresponsible. Each time I've stood up at our meetings in support of this amendment, the number of cases that I have to share with you that have occurred in my home state of Florida has gone up. We're at 113 cases in Florida and close to 1,000 in Puerto Rico. Simply watching more people get infected with this disease as we dither and debate over whether or not it's a crisis, and the idea that we would not get out in front of it right now and make sure that we have adequate resources infused across the country, including for Puerto Rico, in which my understanding is the bill we will consider this week does not even directly appropriate or provide funds for the crisis in Puerto Rico, is outrageous. Now, I'm joined in a bipartisan way because, of course, mosquitoes don't know whether they're biting a Republican or a Democrat. I'm joined in a bipartisan way in support of this amendment and in support of this funding by Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio and Governor Rick Scott and Barack Obama. This is a combination of individuals not exactly in the habit of agreeing on virtually anything. So I argue that we are faced with a crisis that pregnant women are impacted by. I had the opportunity yesterday in my congressional district to stand with a woman who was 9 months pregnant, due next Monday, who has been fearing and been in the midst of this crisis, worrying about whether she was going to have to deal with a baby born with microcephaly, because you don't know whether you have the virus if you've been bitten by these mosquitoes, because the impact on an adult is minimal. You don't find out until your baby is born. And we also know that this virus is likely also sexually transmitted. So we need to make sure that we can address the problem with immediate investment to make sure that we can expedite the development of a vaccine, raise awareness to the public, particularly as we come into the warmer weather season and the rainy season in many parts of the South, where pooling stands of water generate and breed mosquitoes. We walked around a backyard that, even though it was immaculate yesterday, had numerous examples of corrections that need to be made. And so these resources are vital. Last week, we heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is something of the Zika czar for the CDC, and he said that from a scientific and research perspective, we should not use funds designated to combat Ebola to fight Zika. And his answer was simple. It's because it doesn't make sense. And he further explained that Ebola has not disappeared, and we need those resources to continue ongoing efforts to prevent a further outbreak. So I say to this committee, we need more public education. We need more resources to ensure that people are able to protect themselves. We need resources to expedite the development of a vaccine. And with all due respect, the administration has repeatedly, over and over and over again, in writing and in person, with the majority, walked through and fully briefed on the majority on the specifics of their proposal. So I say to this committee, we have to act responsibly, appropriately, comprehensively, and immediately. And we need more investments in vector control and mosquito eradication. We need to understand this disease, and we need to stop playing politics and just get this done. My constituents cannot wait, and millions of people across this country, as we go into the summer mosquito season, can't either.
Will the gentlelady yield briefly?
I'd be happy to yield.
Just to correct the record, Dr. Fauci is at the National Institutes of Health, not the CDC.
I happily stand corrected. He's still maintained that this is something that we should not do, reclaiming my time.
Thank you very much.
He's still reclaiming
Cole.
my time, Mr. Chairman, since I yielded.
Chairman Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I yielded, and I'm reclaiming my time. So if
Your time has expired. Yeah. Chairman Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
My point was made.
This really isn't a debate about Zika. It's a debate about whether or not we're going to pay for the measures that are necessary to actually take care of Zika. The reality is there's not been one thing that has not been done because of lack of money, not one thing. Everything the administration wants to do to this point, it has had the funds to do. So to suggest otherwise is to create a panic where there shouldn't be one. Second, you have to remember they have $600 million. With your bill, they'll have an additional $600 million. We will put hundreds of millions into my bill, frankly, for fiscal year 2017, and we'll be spending at basically the same pace, if not a little bit faster, than the administration originally proposed itself. The only difference is that we're actually going to pay for it. And that's the underlying debate here. The administration would like us to do this with no offsets, no payment, just add another $1.9 billion to the national debt. We agree it's important. We're saying absolutely. That's why you and Chairman Granger and I sent a letter immediately when this was announced to say, use whatever funds you need, we'll backfill. On the Ebola issue, there is still $1.7 billion of unobligated money. And that money was to be spent over several years, not even just next fiscal year, years. So we are more than happy if they come up short to fill that within the regular appropriations process. In addition, it's worth noting the administration itself was beginning to move money out of those Ebola accounts. They moved in their budget proposal over $40 million, suggesting perhaps they had overestimated. I'm not critical about that. But again, to suggest that this issue isn't being taken care of, when the government has all the money it needs, we're moving to give it more, and we'll add more into next year's bill. Let's just be honest. We just want to be able to do this and not pay for it, not prioritize. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why, we are running $500 billion deficits next year, and we have $19 trillion debts. When something like this happens and you have the time, you actually should move in a thoughtful and prudent way. That's what we've done to date. That's what we'll do in your bill tomorrow. Frankly, that's what we'll do in Ms. Granger's bills and my bills for next year, without a yield back.
Will the gentleman yield briefly?
Certainly.
On Ebola, I'm told that there was $5.5 billion provided 2 years ago to fight Ebola, that there's still over $2 billion left unobligated, leftover monies on Ebola. We know hundreds of millions will never be spent, no plans. The agencies have told us so. The bill that I'm sponsoring only rescinds $350 million of the Ebola balances, which, as you said, would still leave in the Ebola account nearly $2 billion.
I think that, Mr. Chairman, is absolutely the key point. Again, let's just be a little prudent and a little bit thoughtful about how we proceed. It's not as if we don't care here. It was a Republican Congress that provided that $5+ billion, and it was bipartisan. Actually, both sides worked on that. Last year, the president asked for $1 billion for more money for NIH. We gave him $2 billion, which again was a Republican initiative. Frankly, last year we gave him more money for the Center for Disease Control than he requested. And my guess is we will do both those things again this year in the FY17. So our priorities are, the difference is we've paid for it at every step of the way. And that's actually better for the agencies themselves to have it built into the baseline and paid for, as opposed to supplemental emergency appropriations with absolutely no offsets. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Serrano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of Mr. Lowy's amendment. But I'd like to use my time to bring the committee up to date, if they're not up to date, on a related issue, an issue that may involve us in the future, because as members of Congress, we get asked questions as a body, but we also get asked questions back home as individuals. You're not going to believe where I'm going with this, but this is the truth. Major League Baseball had 2 games scheduled to be played in Puerto Rico. And those games were going to be played in memory of Roberto Clemente in San Juan. And the city of San Juan, in the middle of a fiscal crisis, put in a couple of $1 million to fix up the stadium and so on. The league, through its Players Association, I think, I'm not sure, and I want to be clear, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not second-guessing any decision. I'm just concerned about the message that this sends. The league decided that the players didn't want to go, and so they changed the games from Puerto Rico to Florida. With all due respect to my Floridian friends, Florida is the epicenter of the issue within the 50 states. So what's the difference of bringing it from Puerto Rico to Florida in terms of safety situations? Secondly, I've always wondered, when you sign a contract for millions of dollars to play baseball, I've never heard of you saying, I'm not going to play there, or I'm not playing tonight. I've always heard of, I put on the uniform and I play. So there are questions that we have to ask and find out. Here's another thing. If, unfortunately, this begins to spread out of Florida and goes elsewhere, we're going to have people saying, I'm not going to play the Atlanta Braves series this weekend because it's in Atlanta. I'm not going to play the Cincinnati series because it's in Cincinnati. Secondly, lastly, we have an Olympic team going to Brazil pretty soon. If Florida is the center of the situation within the 50 states, if Puerto Rico is the center of the situation within anywhere under the American flag, Brazil is the problem recognized worldwide. Does that mean the Olympic team is not going? Are we going to be asked in our districts why we're not sending the Olympic team, or are we sending the Olympic team? So I bring this up not for a vote. I bring this up not as an amendment. I bring this up not as an issue for us to come up with a conclusion, simply for us to say, how was this decision made? And why was it made? Now, one could say, Serrano, every other day you're telling us to help Puerto Rico get out of its debt crisis. But you know something? There is a relationship. When people are hurting, as much as those folks are hurting, just 2 days of baseball to honor the greatest hero the island has ever seen anywhere, in sports, in medicine, in the arts, anywhere, could have meant a lot for the willpower and the desire to face everything else. And baseball, as you know, is almost a religion in some of these countries. In fact, I've always either joked or profoundly stated that we Americans exported three things to Latin America: democracy, capitalism, and baseball. One of the three has been a major success, a huge success. But anyway, what I want people to do is just think about it. Why were these games canceled? What was the decision to bring it to Florida, which people from Florida are telling us is a problem that we have to address immediately? And how do we know now that people are people going to stop going to other places if this spreads throughout the country and not playing baseball? Or, and I close with this, is this more of Major League Baseball turning its back on Puerto Rico as it has for the last 15 or 20 years, where they've done very little to build up the game on the island that introduced, in many ways with Cuba, the game to all of Latin America? So just food for thought. Think about it, because the questions will come to you soon, I assure you.
Chairman Granger.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we go back to what we're trying to do. We're trying to put immediate funds for immediate problems. And as this occurred, we said, all right, what is the fastest way to get the money to them? How do we make sure it goes to the right causes and complaints in this period of time, which is what this bill does. We always said, though, as we understand more about Zika, as we get more information, which we're doing daily, then we know more about what we're dealing with and can provide funds at that time. You know, we have funds left over from Ebola, but it wasn't because mistakes were made. It was because when Ebola's crisis erupted, we said, let's put this funds that we can get to, understand as it goes forward, which is still including research on Ebola. So we didn't do it wrong, but we do have money that can be transferred, which is really important when we did that, that money could be transferred for another use. And that use right now is Zika. So, you know, we can point fingers any way we want to. I think it's a waste of time and energy, but instead to say, here's what we're doing right now, and we all recognize there'll probably be more to do at another time later, but let's make sure we're prepared for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Laurel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think the fastest way that we can address this problem is to really agree to the $1.9 billion that the President has requested, which he did in February, in order to meet this crisis. And it isn't, you know, quite frankly, that it is, we've made up the number of 1.9, and there for a while in this committee there was the view that the administration had not provided enough a background documentation of where they would use it. The fact of the matter is we can take out the charts, the bells and whistles, and show precisely where the money is going to be used. I think I may have said this before. Here we had more information on where these dollars were going to be used than we did on the Iraq War. And we didn't find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We clearly know we have a very serious crisis on our hands. And that is what the science community is talking about. And as you listen to the scientists around the country and around the world, they are talking about the window of opportunity closing on the ability to address this problem. It needs to be addressed now. My colleagues have talked about the numbers and the number of pregnant women. The temperatures are rising in the U.S. And I will tell you, for my colleagues who represent Gulf states, I just say beware, because it's on its way. And there are 79 representatives from Gulf states in this body, most of whom don't come from the Democratic side of the aisle. And my colleague from Florida said the mosquitoes don't select who they bite. I welcome what my colleague from New York said. You know why the Baseball League made the decision? Because they don't want to put their players at risk. They don't want to put their health and safety at risk. And this body is putting the health and safety of Americans and others at risk today. In less than 100 days, our young athletes, men and women, and their families are supposed to go to Brazil. I don't know where the Olympic Committee is going to go on this, but if they follow the advice of the CDC, they'll think twice about whether or not we will participate in those games. I think, my colleague from Oklahoma talked about, I also want to just say, with all due respect, and we are good friends, but I think that wasn't solely a Republican initiative to deal with increasing the funding for the NIH. We were able to go as far as we did based on our ability, and I'll talk about personally having been able to get on a bipartisan basis additional funding so we could do it with robbing Peter to pay Paul. The fact of the matter is, already $50 million has been taken from the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Fund. Now, you may think that doesn't have any effect on your states and their ability to address crises and emergency, including Zika. Alabama has lost 6.9%, California 9.3% of their funds, Connecticut 6.3%, Florida 9%, Georgia 8%, Illinois 8%, Indiana almost 8%, Kentucky almost 7%, Maryland 7%, Minnesota 6%. New York, almost 8%. North Carolina, 8%. Ohio, 8%. Virginia, 7.6%. That's money already gone from your emergency preparedness funding that your public health departments will not be able to get in order to deal with an impending crisis, any emergency that they can't deal with. So if you think that this doesn't come at any expense, sit down with the public health infrastructure in your state and figure out whether or not they are going to be able to meet any kind of a crisis, given that we're shifting funds because we do not want to provide this administration with the money that it needs in order to move forward. We have physicians advising women not to get pregnant. They're saying avoid conception is the only way to ensure avoiding the birth of a deformed baby. What are we telling American women today? Especially, coming from folks who some don't believe in contraception. And so the fact of the matter is, why are we delaying? We will look back on this and say, we put people's health at risk, we have delayed, we've caused people to suffer, and we have put this nation's health care and the health care of others at real jeopardy for some ungodly reason, and I don't know. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I was going to ask the gentlelady if she'd yield just for
I don't have any time. I've just been told I don't have any time, Mr. Cole. I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman,
I'm out of order.
I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a quick point. I don't think I suggested that the increase at NIH was not bipartisan. I said the president had proposed a $1 billion increase, and we doubled it.
But you said it was a Republican initiative.
Well, actually, it was in both bills, but I didn't say it was not, not supported in a bipartisan sense. I said the president proposed $1 billion, and we did it. So, and if I implied something else for that, I request your forgiveness.
Would the gentleman
Thank you.
You're happy to yield to the chairman.
Just as a note, the dollars in my bill can be used to reimburse the health departments that the gentlelady was referring to.
Sam, can you get me?
Is there further discussion?
Can I get more time, Mr. Chairman? After Ms. Lowy. Okay, Mr.
Gentlelady is recognized to close.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Laura would like to, may I yield to her before I close for another minute?
You have 1 minute.
Okay.
Thank you very much. In addition to which, let me say that there is no reimbursement of the $500 million that was taken from Ebola. I sat in meetings, Mr. Chairman, with yourself and others where they said we were going to backfill. We're going to replace the Ebola money. It is not replaced in this bill, the bill that's going to be introduced. In addition to that, we're taking more money out of Ebola. There has been no interest in doing anything with regard to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not addressed in this effort. This is a.
Back my time.
I yield back to the. I yield to the gentlelady, and I thank you.
Thank you, my colleague, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had this debate over and over again. I just want to make a point, which I've made many times. The president has requested $1.9 billion based upon information, detailed information, provided by certainly Dr. Frieden, Dr. Fauci, and others at the National Institutes of Health. They've made it clear to me in private discussions, they made it clear in private hearings, that this money is not extra money. They have requested what they feel to appropriately deal with the Zika virus that is plaguing our communities and is only spreading. And in conclusion, I would just like to read a little quote. In 2013, my colleagues, my friend, chairman of Labor HHS, after the Oklahoma tornadoes, the chairman of this committee, Chairman Rogers, said, quote, "I don't think disasters of this type should be offset by other budget cuts. We have an obligation to help these people." And in conclusion, I just want to make it very clear. This number, $1.9 billion, didn't come from me, didn't come from the other members of the committee. It came from the experts with whom you work very closely that have said this $1.9 billion is needed now so we can plan ahead, address this crisis, and hopefully eradicate it. Thank you.
All time has expired. The vote is on the Lowy amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no.
No.
Noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Hearing none, I recognize Mr. Adderholt for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to favorably report the Defense Appropriations Bill for FY 2017 to the House.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mrs. Lowy, your request for 3 days is granted.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Congratulations to the subcommittee.
Thank you very much.
Moving on.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Be a lunch in the offing somewhere. Right away. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you. Congrats.
Hey, thanks for coming. We just slide this down.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much
Good
for
work.
your having my back. Get out of here. Thank you. Sir. I know. Don't worry, I have that.
Hey, Chairman.
Don't worry, sir. Well done.
Tom, that was well done.
Thank you. All right, let's get all this. She's the
Committee will be in order. Committee will be in order. Moving on to our second item on the agenda today, consideration of the 017 Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill. And I recognize Chairman Tom Graves to present that bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome everybody for round two. All right, so Legislative Branch Bill, one of the most exciting bills that we will deal with today, I know, and throughout the session. The overarching goal of this bill is to ensure that we continue to preserve the beauty, enhance the security, and improve the institutions of the United States Capitol complex. So I'm glad to report that we've accomplished our mission.
Gentlemen will suspend until we have order. Members and audience and staff, if you wish to have a conversation, please take it outside the room. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm pleased to report we have accomplished our mission, which is your mission, and we did it in a way that respects taxpayers by making tough choices. This bill demonstrates the great work that Congress can do working together even during a time of lean budgets. The committee will be proud to know that this bill continues to use a zero-based budgeting approach. That means each legislative branch agency was required to justify its budget request from scratch. And this practice curbs wasteful spending and safeguards taxpayer dollars. Additionally, we continued the members' pay freeze, and this was a simple decision for me. If our constituents aren't getting a raise in this economy, then we shouldn't either. It's also worth noting that the Capitol Dome restoration project is on time and it's under budget. In fact, my office has had a little fun with this, posting some pictures every day on social media of the scaffolding coming down using the hashtag #FreeTheDome. We've also have a family-friendly themed bill this year. We've worked with members on both sides of the aisle to make certain that families can enjoy their visits. In fact, baby changing stations now will be available throughout the House office buildings and in the Capitol. Visiting the Capitol with a new baby can be difficult enough, and young mothers and fathers traveling with their children in tow should have all necessary facilities available to them. Additionally, with so many mothers-to-be working in the House of Representatives through their pregnancies, the committee wants to ensure that these soon-to-be moms have access to convenient parking and several conveniences. So this bill incorporates that. And then finally, we've carried on the new tradition of sledding on Capitol Hill. Again this winter, children living in the area can sled on the west front of the Capitol, something that unfortunately was banned until we changed it last year. So simply put, this bill makes the Capitol more inviting and accessible for young families. Now, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz for her role throughout the process of writing this bill, and every member of our legislative branch subcommittee for their hard work and valuable contributions. Together, we have received and worked through more than 200 submissions, and I'd also like to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle who worked on this bill as well. In particular, I am very grateful for the work of Liz Dawson and Tim Monahan and Shalonda Young, and of course, Jenny Pannone, who's really stepped up to the plate after we lost our good friend Chuck Turner this past year. As a longtime professional staff member of this subcommittee, Chuck has been missed this appropriations season, and the appropriations family just isn't the same without him. And I want to express my continued sympathies to his family, friends, and those he worked with so closely all these years. And I'd also like to thank Jason Murphy from my personal office and Sarah Arkin from Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz's office. And then finally, I'd also like to note the important contributions that Congressman Sam Farr and Congressman Scott Ridgell have both made to the Legislative Branch Committee. Their hard work and dedication has been extremely valuable, and you'll be dearly missed. Mr. Ridgell, Mr. Farr. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Mrs. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill totals $3.481 billion, which is a $72 million increase above the fiscal year 2016 enacted bill. After many years, I think it is appropriate to begin for us to provide relief to the legislative branch agencies, and I thank our full committee chairman, Mr. Rogers, for understanding the challenges posed by years of cuts through providing an allocation to begin rebuilding the capacity of Congress to do the people's work. I want to also thank my tireless and invaluable clerks, Shalonda Young, and my personal staff, Rosalind Kumar and Sarah Arkin, as well as being especially grateful to the majority staff, Liz Dawson, Jenny Pannone, Tim Manahan, and Jason Murphy with the chair's personal office. On a more somber note, this year we lost our beloved Chuck Turner, our friend and colleague who worked on this committee for many years on both sides of the aisle. It is still difficult to believe that we have produced a legislative branch appropriations bill without the assistance of Chuck all the way through the process, and we miss him greatly. He served this committee with the utmost integrity, honor, and dedication. I began on this committee and the subcommittee in January of 2007. Liz Dawson, the majority clerk, was the minority clerk at the time, and I always joke that I had to earn my stripes with her as a first-year cardinal, but I have come to rely on her counsel, and Mr. Chairman, I think that relationship is important to explain the bipartisan nature of this bill. There is much to be proud of, including establishing a trust fund that ensures that we are fiscally responsible in how we budget for major construction of House buildings, like the Cannon Restoration Project that we're in the midst of. Over the years, we've been able to include enough funding to provide the Capitol Police with new radios. This is a critical life safety tool that law enforcement agencies have needed for decades. We also worked on a bipartisan basis to get workers out of the hazardous tunnels that made many of them sick after being exposed to asbestos. This bill, while it might be small, can and has made a difference. The bill rightfully begins the copyright modernization project with a 17% increase. There is also report language that makes clear that the Library of Congress shall continue to defer to the Register of Copyrights on all copyrighted-related issues. A program of importance to me, as many of you know, is the Historic Buildings Revitalization Trust Fund. It is the fund that we used to save for the down payment on the Cannon building restoration. We will consider an amendment later to ensure the program remains on track to save enough funds to deal with large-scale projects in the future, like Longworth and Rayburn. While there are many positives in this bill, there are also issues that must be addressed as we move through the process. The report does include language that seeks to influence the Library of Congress's process to change its subject headings related to immigration. The Library decided in March of this year to begin using the term non-citizens and unauthorized immigration for cataloging purposes. They did so after being petitioned by Dartmouth College in 2014, a petition they turned down initially, and then again by the American Library Association earlier this year. In January of this year, the American Library Association adopted a resolution calling on the Library of Congress to change the heading illegal aliens to undocumented immigrants. It's important to note that the library did not adopt the term undocumented immigrants, but chose to begin to use the two phrases non-citizens and unauthorized immigration. These new subject headings are still in the process of being considered, as the public will have 30 days to comment on them. The fact that this process is ongoing makes the inclusion of report language now even more problematic. How can the library be expected to go through a fair and open comment period with this language included in the appropriations bill? My side of the aisle could certainly have pushed to have the library reconsider its decision after the Dartmouth petition was turned down back in 2014, because many Democrats and Republicans believe that the term illegal aliens labels a group of people based on a misconception that an immigrant's presence in our nation is a criminal violation, which it is not. But we allowed the process to work because the library is in the business of language and nomenclature and should be free to make these decisions without political interference. Let's be clear. This bill puts the Library of Congress front and center on one of our nation's most contentious and emotional political issues. Over these years, as ranking member, this is certainly not the first time I have found myself in disagreement with the chairman, with any of my chairmen, on a particular issue. Over the years, though, I've worked closely with chairman of this subcommittee to move the bill and the process forward. And though I've been committed, as always, to resolving our policy differences, the politicization of the Library of Congress in order to perpetuate a misconception about immigrants in our country is simply an issue on which my principles will not allow me to bend an inch. This language isn't necessary or appropriate, and sadly, for the first time, if it is not removed, I will find myself unable to support the bill, with the current illegal aliens language included. I'm hopeful that later on during this meeting we're going to be able to take care of that, and I look forward to discussing this legislation through the rest of the process. Thank you.
Grateful to both these members for your careful consideration and attention to this bill. Mr. Chairman, you and your subcommittee and your staffs have done fine work, and I'm proud to bring this bill before the committee today. Our Capitol and the buildings surrounding it house the most successful democracy the world has ever known. It's essential that Congress provide the resources needed to keep this complex functioning and safe and accessible to all Americans. The buildings are a symbol of our freedoms and our way of life. To preserve this image and to promote the health and safety of those who visit and work here, the bill provides $560 million for the architect of the Capitol. The bill also provides $391.3 million for the Capitol Police, an increase above last year that will enhance security functions while maintaining public access. Recent events have reminded us that these officers play a vital role in the safety of visitors, staff, and members. I'm enormously grateful to these officers and their staff for all that they do, and I'm pleased that we can accommodate funding for additional hires and security measures. In addition, this legislation targets funds to ensure effective representation of our citizens, providing $1.181 billion for the operations of the House. This funding allows elected officials in Washington to go to work for the taxpayers each and every day. In doing so, the bill maintains the pay freeze for members of Congress. The bill also provides funding for the support agencies of the Congress, the Library of Congress, the Government Publishing Office, the Government Accountability Office, which helps keep the Congress accountable in its spending. I thank the subcommittee for their good work on this bill, and I encourage all of us to support it and stand by it. Ms. Lowy, would you care to remark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, and Chairman Rogers for your work on this bill. Today we consider funding for the operation of our nation's legislative branch. This is our fifth full committee markup, and we are scheduled to begin floor consideration of our first FY17 bill tomorrow. Yet the House still does not have a budget, and most troubling, is yet to receive a full set of subcommittee allocations. This lack of transparency curtails our ability to determine whether allocations for the bills before us are fair, or whether increases in early bills will more likely result in starving upcoming bills from much-needed resources. The bill before us, without Senate items, amounts to $3.48 billion, a $72 million increase above the FY16 level, initially an adequate bill that included modest increases. For the first time in years, it has now become a partisan bill meant to appease the most extreme members of the Republican Party. And it didn't have to be this way. At the last minute, the majority inserted language that would seek to influence the Library of Congress, excuse me, to use the term illegal alien in its subject headings for searches, rather than the library's preferred non-citizens or unauthorized immigration. To be clear, the library is not attempting to remove the term illegal alien, but only making revisions to terms to bring search items up to date and help researchers locate a wider variety of materials. Republicans are needlessly politicizing a change meant only to help provide the most up-to-date, thorough, relevant information. The inclusion of such language is sadly nothing new for this subcommittee. In the past few years, the majority has spent close to $7 million on a partisan political Benghazi investigation, $2.3 million defending the Defense of Marriage Act, and is now engaging in outrageous, unprecedented attacks on biomedical researchers and women's health. I know we're going to debate this further, my colleagues, but I must take a moment to express my outrage on how the majority on the Select Investigative Panel is conducting its business. The majority's witch hunt of researchers, including scientists, physicians, and even graduate students, will have real consequences that harm medical advances and are nothing more than a political charade and a waste of taxpayer money. Their request for information and subpoenas without any assertion of wrongdoing are an abuse of authority, a violation of House oversight practices, and a page out of the McCarthy-era bullying tactics that are a stain on our legislative process. Partisan politics should have no place on our agenda when there are so many urgent challenges before us. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can work together to resolve this highly political, outrageous issue. And back to the bill. I hope we can improve the bill before us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further general discussion? If not, are there amendments? Chairman Graves.
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and ask that it be considered read.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have just the typical manager's amendment that has a couple of items in there that members of this committee have discussed and agreed to, and I believe have the agreement also with the ranking member. So just a combination of some additional ideas that were not included in the base bill.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
I thank the chairman, and we support the manager's amendment, and I particularly want to thank Chairman Graves for including the additional $7 million for the Historic Building Revitalization Trust Fund. That will continue to allow us to bank funds for future projects, because we know with Longworth and Rayburn pending, while we are continuing to go through the canon restoration, that it's going to be critical that we stay ahead of making sure that we have the resources and we don't overwhelm this bill down the road. So I appreciate the chairman's support and urge support of the adoption of the manager's amendment.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the manager's amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed.
Without objection, reading is dispensed with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you heard in my opening statement, I'm deeply troubled, and I offer this amendment so that we can remove the language included in the report accompanying the bill. This language says, to the extent practicable, the committee instructs the library to maintain certain subject headings that reflect terminology used in Title VIII United States Code. For those who are not aware of what that language is, Title VIII of the U.S. Code uses the term illegal aliens. My amendment would strike the language from the report and allow the library to continue with its process of choosing subject headings without political influence. Many members, I would dare to say, have no idea what the subject headings are at the library. Subject headings serve as the mechanism for how the library catalogs or groups information, something the Library of Congress is well positioned to understand. They use headings that reflect current day uses of words and phrases, so information is easily accessible by its users. There was a time when the library used the subject heading insanity, and now it uses mental illness. The library once had the subject heading Negro, then moved to Afro-American, and eventually to African-American, which is in use today. This is not about the Library of Congress being politically correct, something some Republicans have charged. This is about helping library users find information by using words they would actually search for, rather than offensive terms a modern-day researcher would not even think of using. Let us be very clear. The term illegal alien is offensive to some people. The library found that the term had become pejorative and decided to use the terms non-citizen and unauthorized immigration in their place. That decision has not been finalized, and it won't be finalized until after the library receives public comment. The library changes 3,000 to 4,000 subject headings each year. They have actively maintained subject headings since 1898 to catalog materials held at the Library of Congress, and they have a well-documented process to handle the thousands of changes that they make each year. This change has gone and is going through that process. Now I ask my colleagues, who do you trust to establish the nomenclature used by the Library of Congress? Lifelong librarians or politicians? Let's let the library's public comment process continue without partisan interference. Our colleague Joaquin Castro has a bill that deals with how immigrants are described in the U.S. Code. His bill, in my opinion, takes the correct step to remove the term illegal alien from the U.S. Code, and I hope this Congress can debate that measure and pass it. But we do not have a provision in law nor any requirement that ties the Library of Congress's subject headings to the U.S. Code. This bill, to keep Congress operating in fiscal year 2017, is not where we should be having this debate. We are discussing how the Library of Congress and the nation's libraries catalog information. The library isn't changing how immigrants are described in the code. They aren't removing documents that refer to illegal aliens. They are simply considering the modification of their headings so that people can find information under headings that are both accurate and logical. I ask my colleagues to support my amendment and allow the Library of Congress and libraries across the country that use the LOC's subject headings to remain free from partisan politics. Thank you.
Chairman Graves.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment, and let me just say from the onset, I respect the ranking member's position on this, and it's been a lively discussion we've all had. But this is ultimately about process. That's it. Many will argue that hundreds or thousands of changes like this are made every year, but that's just simply not true. While thousands of subject headings are changed, they don't all garner their own press release that portrays a proposed change as a done deal. They aren't all concessions due to the demands of a political correctness or to a specific group, and they don't all result in the striking of legal terms with precise legal meaning. In fact, changing the subject heading was thoroughly rejected by the library in December of 2014. They basically said it wouldn't make sense to change it, and no one objected at that time. Now, about a year later, after pressure from some outside groups, and we've heard about political influence, political pressures, again, outside groups, the library bent over backwards to create new terminology that censors current legal language. Now, this is highly unusual. The library knows that this process wasn't followed here, that they have a normal process and it was not followed, and we have to ask why. Is it who is best served by censorship at the Library of Congress? Is it the patrons who want to study in the legal library? No. Are there researchers that could benefit from this change? Absolutely not. Maybe it's a specific group or political activist group. Could be. But I believe the library has recognized their mistake, and that's why they worked with us, the subcommittee, to carefully draft the worded language that has been put into this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close by rereading this language because I think it's important that you hear the true intent and meaning to the extent practical. The committee instructs the library to maintain certain subject headings that reflect terminology used in Title VIII U.S. Code. Legal terminology, this is the Library of Congress, a law library. Therefore, it should maintain consistency with the code. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Serrano.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder why we spend time undoing something that is simply changed to reflect many beliefs and to reflect the fact that we have an immigration issue, not a problem, an issue that we have to resolve. And in the process of resolving it, we should be respectful as much as we can to people who are caught up in that situation. Of course, if some people running for president get their way, we won't have to worry about illegal alien. We'll be just calling them criminals and drug dealers, and we won't have to worry about it. But you know, no human being is illegal. No human being is illegal. They may cross a border in an improper way. They may come to the greatest country on earth looking for the same opportunity as so many of our ancestors came. Although my ancestors were taken in a war, I don't take them out of the fact that they've done well. Nobody comes here to create a problem. And to refer to them as illegal aliens rather than undocumented or something else is just adding on to a very painful situation. Rather than taking time in this bill to put in language that says this committee feels that Congress should move ahead on an immigration reform bill, we take time to go back on wording that simply shows some respect. But the most important respect to show is to show what we already know. and what I've repeated twice, that no human being is illegal, and it's to be treated that way. Secondly, the word alien may mean legally, and I'm not a lawyer, something less than what it sounds like. But we know that when we say alien, we usually think of somebody coming from another planet. Well, the places the undocumented come from is not that far away. It's close by. And in fact, we spend a lot of time telling the world, you know, one of the things that amazes me about us as Americans, and we're all guilty of it, all guilty of it. I'm the first one who's guilty of it. We tell the world what a great country we are, and we are. We tell the world what a great democracy we are, and we are. We tell the world that we are the greatest country on earth, and we are. Then we're amazed that people would come here looking for a better life. Maybe we should stop advertising and cut back on our advertising budget. But please, think of this amendment as one that simply says that, well, we're trying to deal with a problem. We're going to show some respect, and that people who are here under this situation are suffering enough. They're not ripping anybody off. At least call them something other than illegal alien. Thank you.
Chairman Diaz-Balart.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I actually stand to both thank the chairman and the ranking member. I don't have to tell you that these are potentially emotional issues, and I will tell you that I was so gratified to see how both of them, Mr. Chairman, have done this in a respectful fashion, talking about the issue in the bill and not other things that could be wrapped around it. I just hope that all of us, and I know that this is a committee that tends to do that, to try to just talk about the issue versus all the other issues that could be externally attached to it. So again, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member, and I hope that we will all, and I know we will follow your leads to have a good, respectful debate, as this committee tends to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What do you say? Ms. Roybal-Allard.
Mr. Chairman, I stand in support of Representative Wasserman Schultz's amendment to strike language in the bill that would bar the Library of Congress from changing pejorative terms used to describe non-citizens and unauthorized immigration. The Library of Congress conducted robust research dating back to 2014 and correctly found that the phrase illegal alien has taken on a pejorative tone in recent years. In addition, they found that the term alien creates confusion among readers, as it also refers to beings from another planet. As members of Congress and leaders of our communities, it is our responsibility to root our conversations in respect, even when we disagree on the issues we are discussing. Recently, that respect has been largely missing from our political discourse, but we can change that today. Mr. Chairman, the term illegal alien is confusing, offensive, and disrespectful to many people. Let us pay attention to the robust research of the Policy and Standards Division of the Library of Congress and support the Wasserman-Schultz amendment. I yield back.
Chairman Culberson.
Mr. Chairman, I want to be sure we all remind us all that the bedrock principle of our the United States, the first nation ever created in history, founded on the principle that the law applies equally to all of us, that our liberty lies in law, that we have to respect the law or there is no liberty. In fact, that principle is so fundamental that our liberty lies in law that it was actually the first inscription on the first coin ever minted in the Republic of Mexico after the revolution in 1821. The first coin they came out with in Mexico had the inscription liberty and law. And I want to also correct the record and point out that in 1952, Congress passed a law which is still on the books, and it is a criminal offense to be in the United States, to immigrate unlawfully to the United States. Title 8 of the U.S. Code, Section 1325, imposes a penalty of 6 months, up to 6 months in prison for any alien, I'm quoting from the law, any alien who enters or attempts to enter the United States unlawfully, who eludes examination, attempts to enter using false or misleading information, shall be punished, imprisoned, not more than 2 years. On a second offense under Section 1326, it's up to 5 years in prison. So the reason those people are here, they're unauthorized, they're undocumented, is because they're here illegally. And we have to respect the law, or we will have no liberty. And that's the bedrock principle of this nation. It's one that all of us as lawmakers take an oath to be sure that we will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which is grounded on the principle that we must all respect and enforce the law equally and with due process to everyone. And it begins with ensuring that all those who come to the United States, who immigrate here to take advantage of the greatest nation on the face of the earth, do so legally. And I also join in opposition to the amendment.
Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the ranking member's amendment to strike this provision from the report. And I believe this hateful language has no place in the Library of Congress. Illegals is a damaging term that divides and dehumanizes communities as used to discriminate against immigrants and people of color. The I word is shorthand for illegal alien, illegal immigrant, and other inaccurate and harmful racially charged terms. As it was said before, no human being is illegal. Human beings need to be central in immigration and discussions in order to move towards a more civilized and humane public discourse to arrive at a humane solutions and policies. Now, it's been said that we've used terminologies in the past, but I think that our country was founded upon the concept that the phrase, in order to form a more perfect union, so therefore it is a process of perfection. On February 19, 1942, there was, the US government announced that all aliens and non-aliens of Japanese ancestry would be relocated. Our government didn't even have the decency to call us citizens or non-citizens, citizens or green card holders. They were all legal residents. So the military carried out Executive Order 9066 and rounded up and imprisoned us without consideration of due process and the protection of the Constitution that is applied to all people, as it was said before. The simple truth is that no human being is illegal, so I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment and to remember this is a process that the founding fathers of our country said in order to form a more perfect union. And the terminologies that we use do change to reflect more accuracy as we become more mature as a nation. I yield back.
Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say thank you to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz for offering this amendment. And I speak as a person, a descendant of African slaves who were transported through the Middle Passage, undocumented. The only documentation my ancestors had were the invoices and retail slips upon sale. Throughout the years, secondly, let me just say the slave trade was enshrined in law, if you remember. So throughout the years, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz gave the example of what terms have been used as it relates to the African American community and population in our own country. Colored, Negro, Afro-Americans, African Americans. And I think when we look at illegal aliens and when we understand what it means to the public and see what the Library of Congress has conducted in terms of the results of their research, I think it's our obligation to understand that all human beings, we should acknowledge the human dignity, at least, of all human beings, illegal, undocumented or not. They're still all of God's children. And I think this is a terrible precedent for this committee to engage in and to have in a bill, because the Library of Congress hires very competent professionals. They're researchers, they know what they're doing. And for us to say that their work is for naught, that we're going to politicize this and say we're going to not allow the results to continue to be part of now what they see as appropriate, I think that does the country a real disservice, and I think that it does politicize what the great research and the great work that they're doing. So I would hope that we would adopt Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz's amendment and recognize that illegal alien is a really despicable term.
Ms. Loy.
I too rise in support of the Wasserman Schultz amendment. It's sad that today we could have supported a bipartisan bill to fund the legislative branch appropriations and ensure the safety and security of the Capitol complex. Unfortunately, at the last minute, language was inserted that would seek to influence the Library of Congress from using up-to-date terminology describing a group of people as it relates to their immigration status. This language has needlessly politicized this process and this appropriations bill and jeopardized its chance of getting bipartisan support. The library has a thorough process for updating subject headings, and it's not our responsibility to interfere in their nonpartisan work. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
There being no further debate, the gentlelady is recognized to close.
Thank you very much. First, I've asked unanimous consent to enter into the record the letter sent by the Tri-Caucus chairman to both the ranking member and the chairs of this committee and subcommittee. Is that okay? I asked unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, to reiterate, and I also appreciate the respectful debate, my amendment seeks to keep politics out of the Library of Congress's subject headings process, rather than set the Congress up as the word police. And I understand that Representative Diane Black recently introduced a bill to mandate that the Library of Congress continue to use the term illegal alien. It is difficult to comprehend why any member would want to stop the Library of Congress from updating its subject headings despite numerous requests through their professional international associations that it do so. But no matter the unfathomable reason why, you can be certain I'm going to continue to fight every step of the way to ensure that this legislation never becomes law. There is no connection between the subject headings in the Library of Congress and the U.S. Code and the terminology it uses. The bottom line is that although the term illegal alien is in statute, it does not make it right to keep it in the Library of Congress's catalog. It has undeniably taken on a hateful connotation that is inappropriate for use, just like other words that they have retired. And I urge my colleagues to do the right thing and support this amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
All time has expired. The question is on the Wasserman Schultz amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
No seem to have it, and the noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, no. Mr. Amade. Mr. Amade, no. Mr. Bishop? Yes. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Calvert? No. Mr. Calvert, no. Mr. Carter? No. Mr. Carter, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Crenshaw? No. Mr. Crenshaw, no. Mr. Cuellar? Mr. Culberson? No. Mr. Culberson, no. Ms. DeLauro? Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Dent? Mr. Dent, no. Mr. Diaz-Balart? Mr. Diaz-Balart, aye. Mr. Farr?
Aye.
Mr. Farr, aye. Mr. Fatah? Mr. Fleischman? Mr. Fleischman, no. Mr. Fortenberry? Mr. Fortenberry, no. Mr. Feelinghuisen? Mr. Feelinghuisen, no. Ms. Granger? Ms. Granger, no. Mr. Graves? Mr. Graves, no. Dr. Harris? Dr. Harris, no. Ms. Hera Butler? Mr. Honda? Mr. Honda, aye. Mr. Israel? Mr. Israel, aye. Mr. Jenkins? Mr. Jenkins, no. Mr. Jolly? Mr. Jolly, aye. Mr. Joyce? Mr. Joyce, no. Ms. Capter? Ms. Capter, aye. Mr. Kilmer? Mr. Kilmer, aye. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee, aye. Mrs. Lowy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lowy, aye. Ms. McCollum? Ms. McCollum, aye. Mr. Palazzo? Mr. Palazzo, no. Ms. Pingree?
Aye.
Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Price? Mr. Price, aye. Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Ridgel? Mr. Ridgel, no. Mrs. Roby? Mrs. Roby, no. Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rooney? Mr. Rooney, no. Ms. Robo-Allard? Ms. Robo-Allard, aye. Mr. Ruppersberger? Mr. Ruppersberger, aye. Mr. Ryan? Mr. Ryan, aye. Mr. Serrano. Mr. Serrano, aye. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, no. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, aye. Mr. Visklosky. Mr. Visklosky, aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Yoder. Mr. Yoder, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye.
Are there members who wish to be recorded? Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Cuellar, aye.
Are there members who wish to be recorded or change their vote? Clerk will tally. While the clerk is tallying, let me remind you, after the consideration of this bill, we will then turn briefly, hopefully, to our last order of business, which is the 302B allocations. On this vote, the yeas are 24, the nays are 25. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there other amendments? Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have amendment number 1 at the desk.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Mr. Farr. Page 2, line 12, increase the dollar amount by $8,314,766. Page 3, line 10, increase the dollar amount by...
Waive the reading, please.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise with this very simple and I hope very bipartisan, non-controversial amendment because it's about our staff. We just passed the defense appropriation for $550 billion. And in that, we gave our troops a 2.1% pay raise. The President has asked for federal employees to get a 1.5% pay raise, a COLA increase. This amendment would allow us to meet that 1.5% by increasing our budgets about $19,000 an office for, as the amendment pointed out, $8.3 million total. Now, it's not just, I mean, we haven't done this for a long time. In fact, if you go back through history, in 2010, our MRA account took a 5% hit. 2011 and 2012, we took a 6.4% cut. 2012 and 2013, we cut ourselves 8.2%. So this MRA has been flat funded over and over again at level years. This is the legislative branch of government. We're supposed to be as capable, in particularly in this budget. And why I like being on this subcommittee is because it really is the foundation for all of the support services in Congress, including the Capitol Police. And you really get into how well we fund it, how well we care for it, and then we ignore our own staff. And we've been doing this over and over and over. And in fact, outside groups that look at this have commented on it. The Congressional Management Foundation has said that we are underfunding our staff. The Congressional Research Service has shown it. A group known as Demand Progress has pointed it out. And the leading think tank executives from Brookings, AEI, the New American Foundation, the R Street Institute, and the Campaign for Legal Center, the Legal Center has all pointed out that we are shortchanging our staffs. So what this amendment does is allow us to keep our staff, because what we find is the turnover is incredibly high. The average job on the Hill now is 3 years or less. And when they ask people why they're leaving, they're saying for better work and better conditions. So the CRS studies have shown that over the last 5 years, the top 12 staff positions, every single one of them has lost value in their pay scale, some by as much as 21%. The same is true as if you take the study back 10 years, all top 12 positions lost value in pay scale. You have to go back 14 years to 2001 before you find a staff position whose salary actually increased in value. In that same period, federal employees increased their value by 6.4%. Today, our chiefs of staff are working at 12.9% less than they were 5 years ago. Our LAs are working at 11.8% less, and our caseworkers, the ones that go on the front line with our constituents back home, are working at 3.7% less than they were 5 years ago. Few people come to Congress expecting to be highly paid. Yet over time, it appears that the difference between current pay levels and those available in other sectors are the determining factor that contribute to employee turnover. So this amendment would correct that. And I think it's not a lot of money, and it's offset in the office of the architect. So let's try to bring back some professionalism in our office where we recognize our staff as much as we are recognizing the role of the military for the U.S. government, the role of all federal other employees, and particularly our Capitol Police that surround us. Let's at least give our employees the raise that they have long deserved by passing this amendment.
Chairman Graves?
First, let me just thank Congressman Farr for his commitment. This is a debate we've discussed and had in subcommittee, and his, as you've heard, his heartfelt thoughts towards our constituent services and how we provide that best. And I want to thank him for that. He's been a tremendous advocate for staff here on the Hill and those that work in our offices and beyond, and done a tremendous job, and he'll always be known for that. We do have some fiscal challenges and constraints that we're trying to operate within, and I know that he did some great research to try to find an offset, but as a committee, we've really deeply looked at all the various components that make this bill, and it's really hard to find those extra dollars at this moment. I will point out, though, that the leadership recently, as you probably are aware, found a 1% increase, or allocated a 1% increase to all MRAs from unspent MRA funds from the previous year. So that's a good step forward in the right direction. We want to continue that conversation moving forward and try to find some ways that we can provide additional resources, but this time I'd have to oppose the gentleman's amendment, not because of the gentleman himself, but just because the constraints were within.
Mr. Eppersberger.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I support my friend Sam Farr's amendment. I think that when you look at what our role is in Congress, we have the legislative role, and then we have the service role. We support our constituents, and we do it well, and if we don't, we probably won't be here. Anyone who has been in management in business will tell you, you're only as good as your team. And I think the same thing with all of our congressional staff. You're only as good as your team. And I think it's really unwise for us not to look after our staff. Politically, we're not taking a raise, so we're not going to get hit on this. In fact, our constituents who have been serviced by our staff, who are overworked all the time. And if we don't deal with this issue, it's wise, it's the right thing to do, and it's something that will make us better, because if we don't, we keep losing staff. We have less people who have experience, who know what to do, how to service our constituents. So I would hope that we could consider this as a fiscal responsibility issue, you know, taking care of your team. We're not talking about just a raise. We're talking about the body itself and making us strong. And when you represent over 700,000 people and you're not going to take care of your staff, I think that's unwise management. So I'd really I would really ask that we can reconsider your amendment, or consider your amendment, and that the majority reconsider this very important issue. I think this has to do with the core of what we do in Congress. I yield back.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of Mr. Farr's amendment. The Farr amendment seeks to add $8.3 million, a 1.5% increase, to our members' representational allowance. All members should be sympathetic to the Farr amendment, and I would venture to guess that the majority of us were prepared for this very hearing by our intrepid staff, arguably who have suffered the most from the cuts that we have endured. It is in both parties' interests to ensure that the House functions at the highest levels so we can attract and retain the best and brightest talent. We must leave this institution better than we found it. That's our responsibility on this full committee. With this in mind, it's important to note that we've provided the Capitol Police, for example, with 13% budget increases over the past 2 years, but have provided the House with a 0% increase over the same period. In 2013, legislative assistants were being paid $6,000 less than they were in 2009 when adjusted for inflation, and I can only imagine how much worse these numbers are 3 years later. In case we've forgotten how difficult it is to survive when you're just starting out, because almost no one here is just starting out, so we're well past that, let me take you down for a walk down memory lane. A median-priced one-bedroom in the D.C. area costs $2,000 per month. You add first, last, and security, and after paying for rent and eating in the house cafeterias, which is no cheap effort either, we're lucky we can keep anyone on staff. We cannot carry out our constitutional duties with such a misguided sense of priorities. Mr. Chairman, I support the FAR amendment. We kind of have to stop the madness here. I know that it is, politically safe to not give our own office budgets an increase, but we have now recovered economically. With 74 straight months of job growth, we have come out of the Great Recession, and it is time to make sure that we're able to have budgets in our congressional offices that meet the needs of our constituents and that support our staff and ensure that they can be paid a wage that is competitive. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to support Mr. Farr's amendment. When you look at it, there's been a 20% decrease in MRA over our last 5 years. That's an average of $300,000. Steadily declining and presently frozen MRAs have negative impacts on our ability to do our jobs. Just last week, it was reported that the average length of service on Capitol Hill for a staffer is 2 years. So basically, when they learn their job, they leave for a better job. The average member's district has seen its population increase by 31,000, almost 32,000 people. That's 31,000 new constituents per member spread over a smaller staff. Furthermore, since Obama took office in 2009 through 2014, his administration has issued roughly 150,000 pages of new rules enacted by this White House. That's more paperwork, more regulations, and more staff work by our teams to deal with a bigger and more complicated government. There is certainly a correlation between declining MRAs, staff number, and staff tenure, and providing our positive results to our constituents. Now, the offset here comes from the architect of the Capitol's capital construction and operations account. And cutting funds from one agency to give to another agency isn't ideal, and I understand this might slow some projects down, such as the Cannon renovation, by a year or so. However, I don't see the point in renovating our offices when we can't even afford to keep them properly staffed. We need to incentivize staff to stay longer and work harder so that we can best serve the people who sent us up here. Therefore, I encourage my colleagues to support Mr. Farr's amendment. And by the way, the Senate nor this president has cut their budgets in the past 5 years. I yield back.
Mr. Serrano.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I wish I could tell you that when I walk down the hallways here or when I'm in my district, people stop me and say, you know, Congressman Serrano, you're the greatest congressman in the history of this country. But usually what I hear is, you know, I went to your office and they were wonderful. Where were you? I said, I was in Washington. I said, oh, that's okay. They were great. And here I hear, you know, I met with so-and-so in your office and they told me straight what they could do, what they couldn't do. You know what I'm talking about, because this is probably one of the few issues where we all have the same experience. The people who work for us are, for the most part, people who are very young. If America knew, and I've often wondered about this, how young the people who run this country are, and I'm not talking about us, you know, they would have new hope as to what is happening in our country, because these young people, when they leave, they don't leave because they don't like their jobs. They don't leave because they don't want to help their country. They don't leave because they don't like working for an appropriator. That's a big privilege. They leave because someone is dangling a job paying 2-3 times. We're not going to compete with that, but not to give them a small raise every year. Okay, do we deserve a raise? Well, when you have 27 millionaires called the Yankees in your district, I'll argue that I deserve a raise, but forget about that. I'm having a better year than they are. So we've decided we're not giving ourselves a raise. That's fine. But our staffs are different. Our staffs are an example. They're a representation of us. and we're all proud of them. And as I look across at all of you, you want to shake your heads in agreement, but there are political considerations. But I wish we can break them the way the gentleman just did and say, I will vote for the FAR amendment, because in doing so, we're showing respect for the people who serve the people who send us here. There can't be a better combination. Thank you.
Mr. Ryan?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. Just would like to say that obviously service and how we can service our constituents, and I commend the gentleman from Mississippi for standing up and advocating for this amendment, because I've been here 14 years and I've seen a real erosion of our ability to service our constituents. And just in my office alone, I think we've seen 3 or 4 staffers that we've had to, as they moved on, we never replaced. And the real concern I have here, having come a few years back, not nearly as long as some of you have been here, but to see the Dave Obies and the Jack Murthas and the chairmans of the world be here and really maintain and retain a lot of the institutional knowledge that we had in this institution and that we've lost in this institution. And they were always accompanied by staff members who had been here almost as long as they had. Chairs of the committee, subcommittee chairs, but also staff in the offices. And I think we're getting close as the world's getting more complicated, as we just went through with the defense bill, the complexities of the world, our intelligence apparatus, our security apparatus, education, entitlements, and all the rest. If we don't start maintaining, not that we don't have great staff now, but the incentives to leave are so great and the pressures to leave are so great, and we're never going to pay what the private sector pays, but we need to start thinking about more than just the next election, not just for ourselves, but for this institution. And if we don't start in this committee, I think, protecting the integrity of this committee and this institution, that we're going to continue to get run roughshod by the executive branch. Because they're going to be able to bring people in and have a level of power that we forgot about. And I watched, you may not have liked it, but I watched Dave Obey and Jack Murtha and others who ran this committee, both Democrats and Republicans, who, them and their staffers, knew more than the bureaucrats knew in the executive branch, knew more than others knew in agencies, and were able to go toe-to-toe with them because of the knowledge they had about the institution and how investments were made and decisions were made on the Hill. So I'm supporting this amendment because I think it's important for us to take a stand as the appropriators to say that the Congress is important, Article 1 is important, what we stand for is important, and we're Article 1. The Congress is, and we've got to start treating our staff with respect and the kind of appreciation that they deserve. And so I rise in support of this amendment, and I hope we see it in a bigger context, not just the constituent services, which are so important. While budgets have gone down, constituent numbers have gone up for many of us, and we're still trying to service our constituents on the ground. But think about this institution and what we need to do to drive democracy in the legislative process here in our own country.
Mr. Israel.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to very strongly support this amendment. 2 weeks ago in my district on Long Island in New York, I attended an event to provide long overdue recognition to Vietnam War veterans. The Northport VA Hospital expected 250 Vietnam veterans to show up. 1,500 showed up. And I went through what I know that all of my colleagues on this committee enjoy. And that is a steady stream of people approaching and saying, Congressman, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm neither, but your office got me a retroactive payment. Your office got me a medal that I'd been denied for decades. When I called your office, they dropped everything and they took care of me. And I may agree with you, Mr. Israel, I may disagree, or as we say on Long Island, I may agree with you, Mr. Israel, I may disagree with you, Mr. Israel, but your office showed me what your priorities are and that you take care of us. Now, I didn't make the calls to the VA. I didn't process the paperwork or the files. My casework staff did that. My veterans casework staff did that. They were, everybody on staff is valuable, everybody, including the people here who, at the very last minute, Mr. Chairman, made that manager's amendment a little warmer. They all work hard. For me, the people in my district office who work hard every single day without regard to politics or policy, but just making sure that the people I represent are taken care of, they deserve some incentives. I want to keep them doing their job they're doing. I want to keep them dedicated. And the way to do that is to give them what so many other people get in politics and in the private sector, the recognition that they deserve and additional compensation. So on behalf of those people, I very strongly support this amendment.
Judge Carter.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of Mr. Farr's amendment.
All right, Sam, you're going to win this one, Sammy.
You know, I've got Fort Hood in my district. We range from 52,000 soldiers to right now around 39,000 soldiers. In the United States Army, almost every soldier in the heavy army passes through Fort Hood at some time or the other. And when they pass through Fort Hood, they learn a wonderful thing. Texas does not have an income tax. So those soldiers decide that the best place to claim as their post of residence is Killeen, Texas. And they all claim Killeen, Texas as their residence. There are literally tens of thousands of active duty troops in this country today who claim Fort Hood as their residence so that they don't have to pay income tax. So when they come to the Pentagon, they don't pay Virginia income tax because they're residents of Texas. We're proud to have them. But in turn, the people who do constituent services from my office have tens of thousands more constituents than other posts in the United States. It's peculiar to my district. We are aware of it. Yet I will repeat what Mr. Israel just said. The greatest compliment I get from day one until today is that my office took care of the business that helped a soldier or helped an individual in our district, and they deserve to be recognized for that. So I join my colleague, Mr. Farr, in this.
Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, I also rise in support of this amendment and commend my colleague, Mr. Farr, for offering it. We're hearing lots of stories here this morning about ways that our staff have extended our reach. Our staff have been dedicated in their service to constituents, doing things that we as individual members could never do for ourselves. I just make a couple of additional points. One is that our staffs and the excellence of our staffs is a defining characteristic of this Congress. We, in the House Democracy Partnership, work with parliaments all over the world. And one of the first things we find, and one of the first things we try to promote, is that staff makes a critical difference as to the quality of a parliamentary institution, the quality of the work they do, our ability to have an independent source of information, to stand up to the lobbyists, to the bureaucrats, to whoever else has staying power around Washington. The staying power that we have, the credibility we have, depends very, very heavily on the kind of staff we're able to employ. Second point, we all know that we're not going to, in the end, compete in every instance successfully with the private sector. That's not what this is about. But I think it is about being able to retain our staff and keep them on board for a reasonable period of time. We all have very young staffs. I expect every one of us depends on a kind of middle-level staff individuals to mentor the others. There's simply no other way to bring our staffs along. And if people are just in and out of here and we don't have that staying power, that ability to mentor, to bring younger staff along, then the whole staff enterprise isn't going to work. We depend on this. It's the right thing to do, but it's also, I think, the smart thing to do to get the staff salaries where they need to be to have reasonable tenures here on Capitol Hill and to have the dynamic within our offices where younger people get brought along effectively. Thank you.
There being no further debate, the question, Mr. Farr is recognized to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Think about this. Your own staff's rent increase. The amount of money that your office will get will not even cover that. In all due respect to Mr. Graves saying we can't afford it, the architect's budget has $560 million in it. We're just offsetting $8 million. We can't afford this. The real question is, can we afford not to do this? Because we're going to be losing this institution's memory. So important for us to do our business well. So I think all of us ought to think about this. This is one thing we can do to help retain our staffs, at least to help them pay part of their annual rent increase. Thank you very much.
Time has expired. The question is on the Farr amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. No. The ayes have it. Amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a minute at the desk. If I could have the reading waived.
The reading is waived. Which amendment is the gentleman offering?
First Amendment.
Number
First
one.
Quigley.
Amendment offered by Mr. Quigley.
The reading is dispensed with.
Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment I'm offering today would require that the CRS partner with the Government Publishing Office to publish selected CRS products on the GPO's website for public access. I want to be clear. This amendment only requires that a CRS product be made available if it is a CRS report or a CRS appropriations product. It does not include any official member-requested CRS products. Obviously, public trust in our government is at an all-time low. I come from Illinois, where 2 of the last 4 governors are in jail or went to jail. 2 of my last 4 predecessors are in jail or went to jail. Trick point, one of them is the same person. But you know what we're dealing with here, folks. With this in mind, how do you put this? The real cost of corruption, as we've seen it, is the loss of the public's trust. And how do we get that back? We get it back by being good examples, by acting appropriately, and being as transparent as we possibly can. You know what the public's saying. You know, what are you basing your decisions on? Why are you doing this? What are you spending our money on? In many cases, here we are putting out reports that we're spending $100 million a year on, and we're telling the public, you don't have access to them. Oh, maybe you do if you're willing to pay for it. There's a little cottage industry out there where you can go and pay for these things. And most of these reports are made available if you know somebody, if you know the report exists, if you know a staffer who has them, and they make them available. Look, it's time to elevate the debate in this country and allow the public to access the same neutral, unbiased, nonpartisan information that we in Congress rely on every day. Opening CRS to the public would empower our constituents with vital information about key issues, policies, and budgets we're debating here in Congress. Increasing government transparency and giving the public the tools they need to hold the government accountable. It is simply good policy to allow educators, students, the news media, and everyday citizens access to these reports. As I've said, many of these reports are available through third-party subscription services. They shouldn't have to pay for these. They already did. In the end, the reports often make their way online, but not in a comprehensive manner. All Americans should have equal access to these non-confidential reports, not only special interests or those who can afford it. I understand there is hesitation from some in this committee on making the reports available, but the amendment I am offering today with my colleague, Congressman Ridgell, addresses the concerns brought forth by members and CRS in the past. This amendment is based off of bipartisan, bicameral legislation that I have introduced with my colleagues in the House and Senator McCain and Senator Leahy have introduced in the Senate. In fact, my legislation was crafted in consultation with CRS and GPO. As I mentioned before, this amendment only requires that a CRS product be made available if it is a CRS report. It explicitly states that it does not include any CRS product that is a custom product or service prepared for a member of Congress. Additionally, while these reports will be made publicly available on the GPO website at the discretion of the CRS director, authorial information can be redacted, ensuring the anonymity of each CRS staffer. While it has been concerned that the publication of the reports might lead to CRS being viewed as speaking for Congress, each CRS product would include a disclaimer stating these documents were prepared by CS exclusively for members of Congress. Finally, one of the primary concerns I have heard in this debate is that public access to CRS reports could weaken analyst protection under the speech or debate clause of the Constitution. Again, we have included language that would assuage this concern, specifically with a simple disclaimer on each report. This amendment addresses each concern we have heard from members and CRS alike. Overall, my amendment requires CRS to publish its reports on a GPO website that can now serve as a one-stop shop for public information. At a time when there is a serious void of accurate, objective, and nonpartisan information in the public discourse, this amendment would increase government transparency and give the public the ability to cut through the misinformation and bring the public a greater understanding of Congress.
Mr. Regiel. Mr. Regiel.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the recognition there, and I appreciate my friend offering this with me, and I appreciate his leadership in this matter. And he covered, I think, really the technical aspect of this, so I'm going to be concise just to point out that I think this is one of these things that are just really common sense. Look who's got the information now. You got all the lobbyists can get this information if they want it. They can go out and pay for it. The people who actually paid for it, the American people, they can't get it unless they know to reach out specifically and directly to their own congressional office. Now, if there was something that involved national security, I wouldn't push this amendment, of course. If there was some logical basis to keep this information away from the American people, I wouldn't co-sponsor this amendment, but that's not what we're talking about here. I found these reports to be some of the best sources of information to make good decisions. And I hold the view that American people, if given good information, make good decisions. And we surely, in this age of personalized news, we need more information that's objective. And I really appreciate the reports, the quality of the reports, the timeliness of them, and I think that the distribution of them to as wide a number of Americans as possible would benefit our nation. And so that and the obvious fact that everybody's got them but the people that paid for them, the American people, seems to me that this amendment is a common sense amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to join me in voting in favor of it. I thank you, and I yield back.
Chairman Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman. I know Mr. Quigley's been working on this issue for a long time. I'd like to clear up just a few things because I know Mr. Ridgel's heart's in the right spot on this, and common sense would be the case had it been, if it's enacted in essence the way you've described. First of all these reports are not available to those who pay at third-party subscriptions. Only reports that have been made publicly available by members are consolidated by third parties to make it easier for those who want the analysis. So to assert that every report that's done by CRS is available currently only to those who pay for a subscription is not the accurate description of how this process works. We need to be really, really careful with this. CRS is an arm of Congress. You have the ability to have research done to investigate a concept or an idea that you may want to work on through policy. When you get that information back, you may not, after receiving that information, want to move forward for various reasons, just the way the information or the research results in something you never, ever intended. So I believe it's up to each and every member. When you request a report, you have an analysis done, you want to make it public to your constituency and those beyond, that is your choice. You should do that if you choose, and many, many do that. But to all of the work and research that's done that is for members of Congress, that is not made publicly available because it's not being used for any purpose or for some reasons may be held privately because of confidential information, I believe that still should remain where it is in the realm of Congress. So let me just caution us on this. I know the intentions are great. They really are good, but members are already making these reports publicly available, and they can continue to do that, and I'd recommend a no vote.
Will the chairman yield just a minute? It's an important matter. I visited the Library of Congress and CRS and got briefed on this matter. And I hold the chairman in high regard. But what I heard directly contradicts that. Inasmuch as this information, they were telling me it's almost simultaneously made available to the public. Now, if that's not true, I won't push this matter. But that's my understanding from 3 senior members of the staff there, that this information is simultaneously made available. And if there's a reason, if there's a national security reason, if there's something that's truly proprietary that would harm our nation in some way, obviously that can be withheld. But the common sense information about our budget or any of these other things, to me, this ought to be widely distributed. So I respect the chairman. If there's a question of fact, then I'll pivot. But I thank the chairman and the senior chairman for the opportunity to speak on this matter, and I yield back.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz, before you speak, let the chair note, we're informed that there will be votes on the floor at 1:50. It's imperative that we finish these bills before we go vote. So with that in mind, can all of us agree to keep our remarks at a minimum? Say 3 minutes? Is that agreeable? How much? 2 minutes? 3 minutes. Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with tremendous respect to Mr. Quigley, I rise also in opposition to the amendment. I've been a longtime supporter of congressional transparency. Many of us on this committee have been, but it's critically important because it's critically important for the public to know how we make our laws and how we are serving them. Even with the cuts sustained in this bill over the years, this bill has funded an important transparency effort to provide congressional information in bulk XML format. That initiative is ongoing as more data is being provided in this format, making it easier for outside groups and developers to analyze congressional data and provide that analysis to our constituents. We were all in agreement that this was an important transparency move to make, and it was the right thing to do. But I have serious concerns about changing the role that the Congressional Research Service plays as a congressional support agency, as the chairman has pointed out. Factually, these reports are not immediately made available. They are made available at the discretion of a member of Congress, which is where that discretion should remain. CRS is a part of the policymaking process. We rely on them for nonpartisan, objective research on a wide variety of topics. Having CRS go through a long and arduous approval process that will slow down their counsel to us will not help us do our jobs better. Remember that our MRAs have been cut by $106 million. We may stave that off this time, since 2010. And during this time of budget constraints, members have had to rely even more on the counsel of our CRS analysts. In many ways, they're an extension of our own staff, and we should not do anything to change that dynamic, especially not on an appropriations bill. I know the gentleman has a pending bill on this topic with the authorizers. We should not be making a snap decision here on the spot in the Appropriations Committee. This is obviously something that requires careful thought, and the authorizing committee is where that thought belongs. Now, while I disagree on the merits of both this amendment and that legislation, I believe each member should decide how the Research Service can best serve their needs. Going through the authorization process is the right way to give all of our colleagues a voice in that decision, and with that, I oppose the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized to close.
Respectfully, in the real world, these things are getting turned around right away. Not all of them, because some people don't care about all of them, but the ones that matter are getting out there, people willing to pay for them. Folks, transparency isn't easy, but let's just remember, they don't trust us in Congress. This is the easy one. You want greater transparency, greater accountability? These reports the public pays for, we're basing our decisions on. So answer this question, the constituent looks you in the face and said, reports I paid for Congress as a whole, you're not releasing because? Thank you.
Question is on the Quigley amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. Noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Insufficient number. All right, recorded vote. Clerk, will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, no. Mr. Amade. Mr. Amade, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, no. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, no. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw, no. Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Cuellar, aye. Mr. Culberson. Mr. Culberson, no. Ms. DeLauro.
Aye.
Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, no. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, no. Mr. Farr. Mr. Farr, aye. Mr. Fatah. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, no. Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry, no. Mr. Frelinghuysen. Mr. Frelinghuysen, no. Ms. Granger. Ms. Granger, no. Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves, no. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, no. Ms. Hero Butler. Mr. Honda. Mr. Honda, aye. Mr. Israel. Mr. Israel, aye. Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jolly. Mr. Jolly, no. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, no. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter, aye. Mr. Kilmer. Mr. Kilmer, aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, aye. Mrs. Lowy. Mrs. Lowy, no. Ms. McCollum. Ms. McCollum, no. Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Palazzo, no. Ms. Pingree. Aye. Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Price. Mr. Price, aye. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Ridgel. Mr. Ridgel, aye. Mrs. Roby. Mrs. Roby, no. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney, no. Ms. Robo-Allard. Ms. Robo-Allard, aye. Mr. Ruppersberger. Mr. Ruppersberger, aye. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, aye. Mr. Serrano. No. Mr. Serrano, no. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, no. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, no. Mr. Visklosky. Aye. Mr. Visklosky, aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. No. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, no. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Yoder. Mr. Yoder, aye. Mr. Young. Aye. Mr. Young, aye.
Mr. Bishop?
Mr. Bishop, no.
Are there members who wish to be recorded or change their vote? Mr. Jenkins?
Gentleman is not recorded. Mr. Jenkins, no.
Are there other members who wish to be recorded or change their vote? Hearing none, clerk will tally. I think we have either 3 or 4 amendments. 3. So we will need to keep it
very quick.
On this vote, the yeas are 18, the nays are 31. The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Ms. Capter.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, this concerns a program at the Library of Congress called Open World. It has been a program that's existed since 1999. It was set up in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union and the emergence of Russia, and then in 2003 expanded to include all of the countries of the or territories of the former Soviet Union. The base bill essentially says, let us close the program, just provide $1 million to shut it down. I strenuously object to this proposal. It came up last year, and we were able to, though the funding was substantially cut from prior years, from a level of $15 million down to $10 million, then down to $5.6 million. This year it proposes to zero it out and just provide $1 million to shut it down. I think that is really ill-advised for the following reasons. First of all, this is a program of the legislative branch. That is true. It is not an executive branch program. It is a program that aims to link leaders like you to the emerging leaders of places around the world that do not experience true liberty. We can look at today's tensions from a very, very aggressive Russia on the rise again, the seizure of Crimea, the invasion of eastern Ukraine, the threat of infiltration into Moldova and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Need I go through all these countries? Georgia. We know Russia is now projecting more than 40 times more propaganda than our own Western nations across that region. This is a region whose future is uncertain. And in fact, with the upcoming vote in Britain, one wonders what the European Union will look like a year from now or 2 years from now. This is a very important program. If you go to the Library of Congress, they have broadcast facilities there where you, as a member of Congress, can talk to young leaders in any of these countries where our embassies can arrange broadcast connect, and you can talk about how one runs for office, how you conduct your affairs as a member of the Congress, what our committee structures are. It is really a valuable program. The executive branch has its programs. Some of you may have had occasion to try to deal with the State Department, if you have, you will know what I'm talking about. This is very direct. It's very small. My amendment actually does not have an offset, but I plead with the committee chair and the ranking member as we move forward. If we could look across accounts, the bill itself overall provides an additional $73 million for the coming fiscal year. If we could not find an additional $4.8 million across various accounts to add to this, to at least meet the level of $5.8 million, which was the request of the administration. So I also want to just place on the record that under this program, the Library of Congress does cooperate with the embassies. The embassies are involved in clearances and selecting candidates to come here. It's very fiscally responsible, and I would urge that we provide these funds to the Open World program. They've had over 25,000 emerging leaders since 1990.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
I thank
Chairman
my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my understanding was the gentlelady may withdraw her amendment, but let me just point out that this that we placed in the bill was the most bipartisan request to wind down a program that was started in 1999. The most bipartisan request to put in our bill, aside from sledding on Capitol Hill, so we tried to honor everyone's request. It also maintains our House position from last Congress as it left the House, and again, it has no offset. So with that, I would oppose it if the gentlelady is moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I'm very sympathetic to Ms. Captor's comments. I am on the board of this organization. I was appointed by former Majority Leader Cantor. In the fall of the Soviet Union, in the wake of those days, this organization did tremendous work in trying to build out civil society in Russia. Given the current difficulties we're having, this is the type of program that ought to be looked at, evaluated, and evolved toward increasing civil society engagement, particularly parliamentary exchange, even though the circumstances of doing that with the Russians at the moment are very difficult. So I committed to you all last year that this organization does need to prove itself to you as bringing value. Those of us who are on the board, I believe, are committed to that proposition. There is some evolution already taking place to better wed this organization with the House Democracy Partnership, for instance. I believe this is an important legislative branch prerogative, and I hope that we will be able to figure this out in a smooth way moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Farr is going to report briefly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, what's missing in our foreign policy is member to member. Think about it. When you go to other countries on Codels, you want to meet with like kinds of people. You don't want to meet with just staff or assistants. You want to meet with the real people. And what we find with the House Democracy Committee, in my experience of being in the Peace Corps, that there's nothing better than sort of professional to professional ability to do that. This program allows that. And it was Roger Wicker that got me involved, and I hosted a whole bunch of members from the Duma. One of the members who spoke English very well, he said he'd been invited by the State Department for 13 times to the United States. But until he got to my district and went to town hall meetings and city councils and school board meetings and all the things that we took him to, he said, this is the first time in my life where I really understood the democracy of the United States. It's bottoms up. You're never going to get that experience just visiting Washington. This is a very important program on world political stability, and I hope that we will keep it.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By now, I think most members here know that I rise in opposition to the amendment and continue to believe that this program, while well-intentioned, is a square peg in a round hole. This is the smallest appropriations bills. When I was chair of the legislative branch subcommittee, there were 90 similar programs at the State Department. Many of those programs remain and are funded by the State Foreign Operations Bill, where this type of diplomatic program belongs. There is not an offset, so it's possible that this amendment will be withdrawn. But this program also continues, as the gentleman pointed out, needs accountability. They have not proven that they actually are accomplishing many of their goals, and they also have not made the effort that this committee asked them to for many years to raise and seek and raise private funds, which would accomplish more of their goals. So with that, I support the, with that, I support the underlying bill and oppose the amendment.
There's only about 8 minutes before votes. Chairman Adderholt.
I'll be very quick. I just want to say that I have had experience with the program. I have seen a lot of success that it has produced over the years. Dr. Billington was the one who really sort of was the founder of this program, and he did a great job. And I understand there are programs that in the State Department, but it's nice to have programs that legislators can have some control over. So I know it's a very difficult issue, and I know the money's limited, but I will say this has been a very good program, and it's one program we can have a little bit more control than the State Department. So for that reason, I support the program.
Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, let me add my words of support. It's ironic that we be getting this recommendation today, because in last year's appropriations bills, we directed the Open World program to come to us by March 31st with a plan for how the center would better serve Congress and integrate with the work of the Congress. They've provided that report. I've heard no reference to it today or any indication the subcommittee has paid any attention to this. As a matter of fact, the changes have begun. We had this year programming in Sacramento, California put on by Open World for a dozen budgetary staffers that had worked for a week here with the House Democracy Partnership in Washington, staffers from developing democracies. They're also moving to be responsive to the Congress in expanding the number of countries authorized to work in beyond the former footprint in the former communist countries. So at a time when democracies around the world are under threat, this is more important than ever. And we are talking about engaging our counterparts, but also mayors, judges, civil society leaders. This is the sort of American outreach that is roundly condemned by Vladimir Putin and other voices of authoritarianism around the globe. That in itself should make us reluctant to cut it back or pull it back. So finally, let me just say, I think the presence in the legislative branch is actually an asset, not a negative factor. This, there's some who say it is duplicative. I don't see any program even coming close to duplicating this. And the fact it's not tied to a specific administration or to State Department programs makes it more accessible, and I think for many participants, much better a way of engaging with the U.S. So this is a unique program. We should feel some responsibility to sustain it. Very disappointing to see the subcommittee targeting it once again. All the more since Open World has just complied with directives it received in last year's appropriations bill. I urge support of Ms. Kaptur's amendment.
Mrs. Kaptur is recognized to close.
In closing, let me just remind you of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Mongolia, Russia, Serbia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Ukraine. We as a legislative branch have a responsibility. It is the Library of Congress is the creation of the Congress of the United States. We do have a responsibility, in my opinion, to help to develop leaders in other parts of the world, particularly those where liberty is being tested. It is my intention to withdraw this amendment at this point, but I think that both the chairman and the ranking member have gotten a sense of the support here. We will work with you as we move forward to do something constructive and not lose the momentum that we've gained over several years when the future is at stake for so many other places around the world where new leaders will make the difference in changing the course of history.
That objection,
Thank you
the
so very
amendment
much.
is withdrawn. Are there other amendments? Mr. Quigley.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to break a committee record for getting through this one quickly. and I have an amendment at the desk. Can I ask the
Amendment offered by Mr. Quigley.
I asked that
Page
the reading be
33.
waived.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with.
The argument we made last time, these aren't confidential reports. They are the reports that they make for all of Congress. So the argument I heard in response was, we're going to let members decide what they release. All this does is say, CRS is going to put on a website the list of the reports. Following your logic, how could a citizen from your state know, or your district, know that a report exists if it's not listed somewhere on a website? Not the confidential ones, the overall reports that deal with all the requests that are made. All this amendment does is put the list of those reports on a website so that if people want to ask their member of Congress for a copy and they don't have to pay for it, they can do that.
Chairman Graves?
I would have to oppose for the same reasons as before.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz?
I concur. I also oppose for the same reasons. This is a nose under the camel's tent if you're notifying the public about the titles of the reports. That's the reason that the gentleman is offering the amendment, so that they eventually accomplish the goal of the amendment we just defeated. I say with tremendous respect for the gentleman's passion. But I
Gentleman's
oppose
recognized to close.
The nose, respectfully, if you let the public know a little bit, they're going to want a whole bunch. Ugh.
You heard the gentleman's comment? All in favor of Quigley, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Noes have it. Not agreed to. Are there other amendments? Ms. McCollum?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment offered by Ms. McCollum at the end of the bill before.
Without
Mr.
objection,
Chairman, I
the reading is
suspend.
dispensed.
Mr. Chairman, because I don't know with how much time you're going to give me for my opening, could you, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to consume quickly, but I'm going to take my time. I rise to offer an amendment to defund the Select Investigation Panel of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, informally known as the Select Committee to Target Planned Parenthood. Before this panel even convened, 3 Republican-led committee investigations found no evidence of any wrongdoing. Investigations took place in a dozen states, and they found no evidence of wrongdoing. But instead of accepting the results of the Republican majority's own investigations or other state investigations, House Republican leadership decided to embark on a partisan campaign to target researchers and women's health care providers. From the outset, this investigation has not been objective, fact-based inquiry for the truth. Instead, it's been used as a political weapon to punish providers and researchers who are following the law, using their research to protect and enhance women's health. A medical expert, many of them say, fetal tissue research is necessary part of the research for treatments for Parkinson's disease, diabetes, and other conditions. At a hearing, Lawrence Goldstein, the director of stem cell research program at the University of California in San Diego, said stopping fetal tissue research would slow the search for a vaccine for the Zika virus. Fetal tissue research has been used to produce vaccines for disease like polio, rubella, and the panel was convened by President Ronald Reagan, found fetal tissue donations and research to be ethically acceptable. Now, if that's not enough, this majority has violated longstanding rules and practices for the House and its committees. The chair, after promising ranking member Schakowsky last December that they would hold an initial organizational meeting, the chair refused to do so. No meeting was held to discuss the investigation plan or even how long this panel would have to complete its work. The other thing that is against longstanding rules and practices is that the majority has been routinely issuing unilateral subpoenas and failed to follow the requirement of notifying the minority 3 days prior to issuing a subpoena. Shockingly, subpoenas have been issued to individuals and entities even before they were given a chance to comply voluntarily. And it is on belief that the majority has refused to provide for the safety and privacy by publicly releasing names of innocent citizens. This has utterly failed to protect the confidentiality and security of the American people, the confidentiality and security our constituents expect. The chair issued a press release naming a healthcare provider whom the panel had never reached out to before, making inflammatory accusations with no evidence of wrongdoing. Now, this risk was not hypothetical. The provider named in the press release has been the target of anti-abortion extremists for decades. A fire destroyed his family farm, killing 17 horses and his family pets. And this was all in retaliation for the care he provides women. Now, I believe, Mr. Chair and members, that this panel has been a shameful abuse of congressional power. 3 Republican-held committee investigations found no evidence of wrongdoing, making this panel a complete waste of time and money. So my amendment would just guarantee that no additional taxpayer dollars were squandered on a partisan witch hunt that should be disbanded without further delay.
Chairman Graves.
Mr. Chairman, the House passed in a bipartisan vote of 242 to 184 a simple resolution to create this select committee to get to the bottom of the horrific news from a few years ago, reports that children in the womb were being dismembered for profit. That's what this select committee was formed for. If you want to defund the select committee or dissolve the select committee, the best way to do that is through a resolution and run it through the House. This is not the place for it, and with that, I intend to oppose the amendment from the lady.
Mr. Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of Ms. McCollum's amendment that would defund the select panel. The investigation is a gross misuse of taxpayers' dollars. It is an assault on a woman's right to choose, and quite frankly, nothing more. It's becoming a witch hunt on scientific research. Let me talk about research for a second. Fetal tissue research has been instrumental in the development and the testing of vaccines and treatments for HIV/AIDS, flu, dengue fever, hepatitis B and C. They've used, scientists have used the tissue to study a variety of diseases from Parkinson's to Down syndrome, and now on the Zika virus. If I can just briefly quote from an article that was a March 30th article in the New York Times, House panel issues subpoenas in fetal tissue research inquiry. A special House committee and panel to investigate fetal tissue research issued subpoenas on Wednesday to 8 medical organizations as part of an investigation that has led to charges of intimidation. The House panel was created to investigate fetal tissue research after the release of surreptitiously recorded videos that claim to show Planned Parenthood officials trying to profit illegally from the sale of such tissue. The videographers were indicted in Texas. But the House investigation spurred by the videos continues. 20 states have cleared Planned Parenthood or decided not to investigate. Few affiliates nationwide were engaged in fetal tissue transfers. The quote from the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists criticized the House fetal tissue investigation, and I quote, "Unfortunately, some state and federal politicians are working hard to obstruct, even criminalize, fetal tissue research, limiting the ability of scientists and researchers to develop new vaccines and medicines to prevent and treat disease," the statement said. For many involved in the research, the House investigation is deeply worrisome. Some fear that by collecting the names of researchers, lab technicians, graduate assistants, and even administrative personnel involved in fetal tissue research, members of Congress could be putting their lives in danger. We've been down this road before in this country with regard to naming names and these kinds of investigation, which has a chilling effect on scientific research. We can disagree on many of these issues, but what we can't do is to really overshadow this with this naming of names and calling into question scientific research by really impugning the science community. We need to stand up against these attacks. It's a witch hunt. We should defund and to dismantle this committee. American women really deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Loy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the McCollum Amendment. 3 House committees, 12 states, even a grand jury have investigated Planned Parenthood, and what have they found? No evidence of wrongdoing. The grand jury even indicted the producer of the misleading and deceptive videos about Planned Parenthood on felony and misdemeanor charges. Relying on political talking points rather than the facts, House Republicans launched the House Select Investigative Panel. This panel has made a mockery of House oversight responsibilities, turned its back on the facts, and instead is now focused on conducting a witch hunt against scientists who are doing lawful and life-saving research, putting doctors, researchers, lab technicians, even graduate students at risk without any evidence of wrongdoing goes against the basic fabric of our legal system. It's dangerous, misguided, a vast overreach of congressional power, and these actions are not by accident. They are designed to have a chilling effect on fetal tissue research, which has yielded the polio vaccine and a host of medical breakthroughs. Congress should be focused on growing the economy, combating threats to our national security, charting students on a path to the success. This panel is a waste of time and money, is putting the lives of researchers in danger, and must be disbanded immediately. And I urge support for this amendment to end the wasteful use of taxpayer dollars on this unnecessarily and purely political panel.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Since I sit on the committee, let me bring the members up to date. This is not about stopping fetal research, fetal tissue research. There's nothing to do with it. And go back and read the transcripts of our first 2 public hearings. But it is about whether or not Congress is going to stand by and actually enforce Title 42, which says that you can't sell fetal tissue for profit. In fact, Henry Waxman is the author of that section. And he said, quote, "It would be abhorrent to allow for the sale of fetal tissue and a market to be created for that sale," going on to say any price is unreasonable and illegal. With regards to the 12 states, none of them have investigated to the extent that we are beginning to investigate. And as members of Congress, we should be incensed at the way this congressional investigation is being treated by those for whom we seek data. For instance, here is an example of what was submitted to a congressional inquiry, to an inquiry from this committee, from one of the people who ultimately had to be subpoenaed. This is what was submitted to us. The same papers submitted to a local Freedom of Information Act is this: no redaction. So when this individual responded to Congress, this is what the sheets they responded to looked like. To a local Freedom of Information Act request, this is what they responded to. Now, if that's the way we think Congress ought to be treated, or do we think there's something that needs to be hidden? Well, in fact, let's go over, again, remembering Mr. Waxman's words. Here's an exhibit that came up, which was an invoice. Now, remember, American taxpayers pay for a lot of this fetal tissue because they're done under NIH-sponsored research. This is for 4 human fetal brains, as described in invoice number 5231, for a price of $3,340. That's the bill that the researcher, frequently paid by the paid under NIH funds, is paid. And the shame would be here that if we allowed fetal parts to be treated as chattel. Now, as further evidence that they're chattel, there's even a tax charge, a sales tax charge from the state of California for those fetal brains. Unbelievable. What's even more unbelievable is some companies charging over $900 for a fetal brain, for which they pay the technician who collects the fetal brain in the abortion clinic $10 an hour plus a $35 per tissue bonus structure payment. Now, this is not new math. If you charge $900, and this is only the one tissue, if you just obtain one tissue from that fetus, $900, you're paying a technician maybe $50. Costs you another $90 to ship at FedEx, because they're FedEx charges, but they're all paid for by the purchaser. It's the middleman that's making the money. The abortion clinic probably is making a small amount of money, the middleman making a huge amount of money, and this is what's come to light by the investigation. It is illegal under Title 42, Mr. Chairman. If Congress doesn't, this is blatant that Congress should be looking at this blatant violation of Title 42. We need to continue the investigation. I oppose the amendment.
Ms. Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the McCollum amendment. This select investigative panel has repeatedly and unjustly targeted doctors and clinics in a coordinated attack on a woman's right to choose, despite uncovering absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing. This is devastatingly reminiscent, as the ranking member said earlier, of the Joe McCarthy era, whose bullying and similarly unfounded accusations destroyed the lives and careers of so many American men and women. My Republican colleagues' refusal to disband the committee and stop spending taxpayer money on a wild goose chase is truly appalling. Instead of spending those hundreds of thousands of dollars on the Zika virus, which is a real public health crisis that Republican leadership has inexplicably dragged their feet on preventative cancer screenings, which breast cancer survivors like me know are life-saving, or on programs supporting newborn infants in their first 1,000 days of life, the Republican Select Panel has spent its time and money on the following: 29 unilateral subpoenas that gave the people or entities in question absolutely no chance to voluntarily comply, blocking Democratic member and staff access to panel records, and closed-door witness testimonies where Republican members have screamed at witnesses outside the panel's scope. I wish I could say I'm surprised that the majority's select panel is acting as judge, jury, and executioner on women's health care in America, but that's not surprising, given their track record. Interfering in women's health care decisions is one of the majority's favorite activities. It's a pastime now. They've spent years doing it. This panel is a shameful and wasteful witch hunt into the private lives of women, witnesses, and healthcare professionals all over the nation, and the Appropriations Committee should ensure that no more funding is made available to this panel, and the panel should be disbanded immediately. Thank you. I yield.
Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also rise in support of this amendment to end the partisan aggression against Planned Parenthood. A grand jury in Texas cleared Planned Parenthood of any wrongdoing and indicted 2 of the anti-abortion activists from the Center for Medical Progress for felonies committed in the course of making hidden camera videos instead. Despite continued and repeated affirmation that Planned Parenthood broke no laws and did nothing wrong, the Select Investigation Panel has continued to endanger healthcare providers and patients with its extreme rhetoric claiming that Planned Parenthood is selling body parts. The panel is seeking the names of researchers, graduate students, laboratory technicians, and administrative personnel involved with fetal tissue research. This misuse of subpoena power is clearly aimed at not only stopping the progress of crucial medical research, but personally intimidating the scientists who are engaged in life-saving work to seek cures to Parkinson's, MS, and many other diseases. It is clear that this panel serves no other purpose than to carry out politically motivated attacks on Planned Parenthood, and it should be dissolved immediately, so I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Ms. McCollum is recognized. Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say how much I appreciate Congresswoman McCollum's amendment and thank her for this. It would simply ensure that no government funds are used to support the majority's so-called Select Investigative Committee on Infant Lives, but in reality, it's functioning as the Select Committee on Attacking Women's Health. This Republican committee really is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not only does this committee parade itself as a legitimate investigation, but the recent actions of the committee have really proven that the majority's objectives are purely political, putting the lives of those it has subpoenaed at risk. The practices of this committee are really reprehensible and just plain dangerous. The Select Committee to Attack Women's Health is just another example of politicians working to interfere with a woman's personal health care decision. It's nothing more than a partisan anti-science witch hunt, and it's founded on nothing but lies and is wasting taxpayer dollars. So I urge support for this amendment and again ask for the immediate disbandment of this committee.
Ms. McCollum is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to state again that this select panel is a waste of time, it's a waste of taxpayers' dollars, and it's an abuse of congressional power. 3 congressional investigations, no wrongdoing. 12 states, no wrongdoing. So this is just a partisan inquisition with no other purpose than to go after an organization. An organization that even the presumptive nominee for president, Donald Trump, and I quote, has said, Planned Parenthood has done very good work for many, many millions of women. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question is on the McCollum amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. The noes have it. Roll call is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, no. Mr. Amadei. Mr. Amadei, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, no. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, no. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw, no. Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Cuellar, aye. Mr. Culberson. Mr. Culberson, no. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, no. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, no. Mr. Farr. Mr. Farr, aye. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, no. Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry, no. Mr. Feelingheisen. Feelingheisen, no. Ms. Granger. Ms. Granger, no. Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves, no. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, no. Mr. Honda. Mr. Honda, aye. Mr. Israel. Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, no. Mr. Jolly. Mr. Jolly, aye. Mr. Joyce. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter, aye. Mr. Kilmer. Mr. Kilmer, aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, aye. Mrs. Lowy.
Aye.
Mrs. Lowy, aye. Ms. McCullum. Ms. McCullum, aye. Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Palazzo, no. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Price. Mr. Price, aye. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Ridgel. Mr. Ridgel, no. Mrs. Roby. Mrs. Roby, no. Mr. Rogers.
No.
Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney, no. Ms. Robo-Allard. Ms. Robo-Allard, aye. Mr. Rupersberger. Mr. Rupersberger, aye. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, aye. Mr. Serrano. Mr. Serrano, aye. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, no. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, no. Mr. Visklosky. Mr. Visklosky, aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Yoder. Mr. Yoder, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, no.
Other members who wish to be recorded or change their vote?
The gentleman is not recorded. Mr. Joyce,
Further
no.
Changes or registrations? Hearing none. Clerk will call the roll. Our clerk will tally. As they're tallying, the chair notes that the votes on the floor have not yet materialized. Maybe we will have time to finish our business. If we're brief and terse. Terse is a crossword word. The yeas are 20, the nays are 28. The amendment is not agreed to. There being no further amendments, I recognize Mr. Feelingheisen for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to favorably report the legislative branch appropriations bill for fiscal year 2017 to the House.
Vote is on the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion is agreed to, and the report will be filed. 3 days. Our last order of business today is to revise the committee's 302Bs. The report on your desk provides a suballocation for the defense funding bill we approved earlier. This report also includes the 4 suballocations approved previously, including military construction, agriculture, energy and water, and legislative branch. This report will allow the bills we've already approved to be brought to the floor, keeping us on a tight timeline that gives us a chance at finishing our work by the end of the current fiscal year. In the meantime, we will continue on the path of crafting our appropriations bills and updating these numbers. I ask for your support. Ms. Lowy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In April, the majority first provided an interim report showing only the allocation for the military construction VA bill. The next week, allocations for agriculture, energy, and water became public. Next, we learned the legislative branch allocations. Now we know the defense number, at least for the first 7 months of the year. That's when OCO funding runs out with soldiers in harm's way, a gimmick designed to blow through the defense caps. This piecemeal approach offers the committee no way to judge whether early appropriation bills are allocated more or less than their fair share. The committee is missing information that is vital if we are to do our work responsibly. Do we have a plan to provide for priorities in bills yet to be considered, including roads and bridges, schools, healthcare, law enforcement, and homeland security? We don't know. House Republicans can adopt a budget resolution this year. That raises serious questions about whether the majority can resist extreme voices in their conference. When we get to the last bills, will the majority switch to a lower discretionary cap, inadequate to meet the serious challenges America faces? This committee, this House, this nation deserves to know if the allocations provide sufficient resources for critical priorities in all the bills. I urge a no vote on this process.
Are there other members who wish to be heard or wish to comment? If there's no further general discussion, are there amendments? If no amendments, I recognize Mr. Frelinghuysen.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee approve the revised interim report on the 302B allocations for the fiscal year 2017.
Question is on the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. Motion is agreed to. Recorded vote is requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, aye. Mr. Amadei. Mr. Amadei, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, aye. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw, aye. Mr. Cuellar. What did he say? Mr. Cuellar, no. Mr. Culberson. Mr. Culberson, aye. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro, no. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent, aye. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, aye. Mr. Farr. Mr. Farr, no. Mr. Fatab. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, aye. Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry, aye. Mr. Frelinghuysen. Mr. Frelinghuysen, aye. Ms. Granger. Ms. Granger, aye. Mr. Graves. Mr. Graves, aye. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, aye. Mr. Honda. Mr. Honda, no. Mr. Israel. Mr. Israel, no. Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, aye. Mr. Jolly. Mr. Jolly, aye. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, aye. Ms. Capter. Mr. Capter, no. Mr. Kilmer. Mr. Kilmer, no. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, no. Mrs. Lowy.
No.
Mrs. Lowy, no. Ms. McCullum. Mrs. McCullum, no. Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Palazzo, aye. Ms. Pingree. No. Ms. Pingree, no. Mr. Price. Mr. Price, no. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, no. Mr. Ridgel. Mr. Ridgel, aye. Mrs. Roby. Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Mr. Rogers, aye. Mr. Rooney. Mr. Rooney, aye. Ms. Robo-Allard. Mr. Robo-Allard. Ms. Robo-Allard, no. Mr. Rupersberger. Mr. Rupersberger, no. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, no. Mr. Serrano. Mr. Serrano, no. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, aye. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart, aye. Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, aye. Mr. Visklosky. Mr. Visklosky, no. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, no. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, aye. Mr. Yoder. Mr. Yoder, aye. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye.
Are there members who wish to be recorded or change their vote? Clerk will tally.
Good job, Liz.
On this vote, the yeas are 28, the nays are 20. The motion is agreed to. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be given the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the items approved today. Without objection, so ordered. If there's no further business, the committee stands adjourned.